to John Gelsich. I think you have his email. So
when he gets back. Well, listen, I look and see that it's 7:01. So I think that I will at least initiate the script for the meeting and get started, and expect that Mary and Rob will be entering soon. So welcome to the Planning Board meeting of July 13th. As a preliminary matter, this is Muriel Kramer, Planning Board Chair. Permit me to confirm that all members and persons anticipated on the agenda are present and can hear me. And so when I call your name, just respond in the affirmative. Gary Trindle.
Gary Trindle present.
Jane Moran.
Jane Moran, present.
Rob Benson. Dave Paul.
Dave Paul, present.
Mary Larson Marlowe. Deb Feinbrook.
Deb Feinbrook, present.
Sundar Sivaraman. How do I say it, Sundar?
Present. Yes, you got it right.
I came close. Mr. Gelsich is away on vacation with his family. He will not be here tonight. Miss Pemberton.
Present. Sorry.
And do we have Mr. Paradis? We don't, I don't think. So as people come, they will always introduce themselves at the meeting, so have no fear. So good evening. This open meeting of the Planning Board is being conducted remotely, consistent with Governor Baker's executive order of March 12th, 2020, due to the current state of emergency in the Commonwealth due to the outbreak of the COVID-19 virus. In order to mitigate the transmission of the COVID-19 virus, we are complying with the executive order that suspends the requirement of the open meeting law to have all meetings in a publicly accessible physical location. All members of public bodies are allowed and encouraged to participate remotely. The executive order, which you can find posted with the agenda materials for this meeting, allows public bodies to meet entirely remotely as long as the public body makes provisions through adequate alternative means to ensure interested members of the public are provided reasonable access to the deliberations of the meeting. Ensuring the public access does not ensure public participation unless such participation is required by law. This meeting will feature public comment. It will further include several public hearings. For this meeting, the Planning Board is convening by video conference via Zoom app as posted on the town's web meeting calendar and the board's agenda identifying how the public may join. Additionally, the meeting may also be broadcast by HCAM through one or more of its channels or platforms. Please note that this meeting is being recorded and that some attendees are participating by video conference. Accordingly, please be aware that others may be able to see you and take care not to screen share your computer. Anything that you broadcast may be captured by the recording. All supporting materials that have been provided to members of this body are available on the town's website via the web meeting calendar. Unless otherwise noted, the public is encouraged to follow along using the posted agenda unless I note otherwise. We will now turn to the first item on the agenda. Before we do so, permit me to cover some ground rules for the effective and clear conduct of our business and to ensure accurate meeting minutes. I will introduce each speaker on the agenda. After they conclude their remarks, the chair will invite board members to provide any comment, questions, or motions. Please hold until your name is called. Further, please remember to mute your phone or computer when you are not speaking. Please remember to speak clearly and in a way that helps generate accurate minutes. For any response, please wait until the chair yields the floor to you and state your name before speaking. If members wish to engage in dialogue with other members, please do so through the chair taking care to identify yourself. Not every agenda item will feature public comment. For items with public comment after members have spoken, the chair will afford public comment as follows. The chair will first ask members of the public who wish to speak to identify their names and addresses only. Once the chair has a list of all public commentators, I will call on each by name and afford 3 minutes for any comments. Finally, each vote taken in this meeting will be conducted by roll call vote. So, welcome to everybody. Let me just take a peek. Do I have Rob Benson yet? I don't see him.
Yep, he's here.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate you. And then Mary Larson Marlowe. Is Mary here?
Yeah.
Not yet. When she does, the minutes will reflect when she arrives. I note that Phil Paradis is here from Beta, our engineering support.
Yeah, he's on mute.
Yeah, I see that. Okay, so let me switch to the agenda. The very first item of business, first I want to just, now that the meeting is officially open, I want to make sure I congratulate Sundar. Welcome to the board. We look forward to having you here with us, and certainly every member of the board stands ready to help you get acclimated and find your way. John is an unbelievable resource. Make sure you take advantage of that. The only caution is if you're actually talking about particular agenda items, you can only talk to a couple members of the board. You cannot talk to more than a majority, and it makes sense to only talk to one or two to be super safe. Jane, congratulations on your win. It's good to have you here for the next 5 years. I'm sure you're going to miss running for election, though, right? It's such a good time.
Sure. It's a lot of work.
And then a shout out to Amy Ritterbush. She leaves a big hole here, a big gap here on the planning board, but very happy for her and the select board, and Hopkinton is lucky to have her there. So one of the things that we'll need to do eventually is before too long is fill that spot. I'm happy to say that the very first item of business is the reorganization of the board. And I have had a wonderful 2 years serving this board. I made it very clear that I thought that 2 years was about the natural limit. In my mind, I think that we need to spread the opportunities around, and we benefit from the leadership of others, not just a single person. I think that I see Mary Larson Marlowe on Brent's iPad. There we go.
My computer
Welcome.
was giving me lots of problems today.
All right. So the full board is here. That's the good news. For purposes of reorganization, I hope that you have all been considering where you might like to play a role. And I will at this time open the floor. And I see, Deb, that you're muted. Do you need to be unmuted, or are you able to do it? Oh, okay, great.
Yeah, I just have kind of a noisy crowd, so I'm going to be in and out just so it doesn't disturb anybody.
Yeah, we understand, Deb. I just want to make sure that at this time we'll entertain motions for the chair of the planning board going forward for the next year.
I motion
Deb.
Gary Trendle to be
So
chair.
you nominate
Second.
Gary Trendle? Oh, and Mary seconds it. Are there other folks that are interested that have nominations? So Gary, first question, do you accept the nomination?
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Deb, and thank you, Mary.
All right. I want to make sure if there's anybody else who would like to be considered for the role or has a nomination, please speak now. So by roll call vote, we will vote for Gary's nomination to be the chair of the planning board. Muriel Kramer votes yes. Gary.
Gary Trendle, yes.
Sundar.
Sundar Subramanian, yes.
Jane.
Jane Moran, first of all, I want to thank you, Muriel, for your great leadership.
Oh,
It's been very valuable. And yes, a big definite yes for Gary.
thank you. Deb.
I too want to congratulate you, Muriel, for doing a stellar job. I've been impressed and honored to serve with you.
Thank you so much.
And continued service as well. And I vote for Gary as well, as I nominated him too.
Dave.
Dave Paul, yes.
Rob.
Rob Benson, yes.
And Mary.
Mary Larson Marlowe, yes.
So for the next step in the process, I will turn it over to the new chair and continue with the reorganization, nominating vice chair. Good luck, Gary.
Okay. Thanks, Muriel. And I just want to say a couple of things really quickly too. One, I'm honored that all of you are willing to entrust me with this role. I'll be honest, I'm a little scared of it in some ways, but you know, I look forward to it, and I look forward to continuing to work with all of you. I also want to thank Muriel in particular. I've learned so much from you, Muriel, in the last 2 years, and I just wanted to highlight a couple of things that are really, really meaningful to me. one is that you always seek perspectives other than your own, and I think that that's so important for us as a board. There's a reason there's 9 of us. There's a reason it's not just 2 or 3, and that's because we want that divergence of thought. And I applaud you in always sort of seeking those other perspectives. Secondly, I think from a transparency perspective, we've always been true to transparency and making sure that the discussions we have are in public as per our guidelines and laws. But I think you champion that in a way that has really anchored home with me. And third, I really appreciate your ability to help people find their voices and to draw in their perspectives and make them feel comfortable. And again, I think that's one of the reasons I've really enjoyed serving on this board. And I think all 3 of those things are things that I would like to continue. I also want to say I'm going to ask for help. Like I said, I'm a little intimidated by this, but I think collectively we have a lot of experience. So I want to make sure that all of you feel comfortable and committed to speak up. And if I'm not doing something the right way, or if I miss something from a process perspective, I need your help. So encourage you to speak up. And then lastly, I did just want to take a moment and give Sundar a chance to introduce himself. And I think that because he's new to the board, just wanted to give him a few minutes before we move to the vice chair discussion. I just wanted to ask Sundar to quickly introduce himself and tell us a little bit about himself and his interest in the planning board.
Thank you, Gary. My name is Sundar Sivaraman. I've lived in the town since December 2006. So it's been a while. So I decided, responsibilities aside, I think I owed something back to the community. This community has given me everything that I've asked for and more. Great community, great scouting community. I took up running here. I ran the Boston Marathon after I came to Hopkinton. That has to be a rite of passage, I guess, for everyone. Definitely wanted to serve in some capacity in local government. That is, I think, one of the responsibilities of being a citizen of this country. So the mere fact that I had an opportunity to do this, that alone counts for something, because where I come from in India, local government is not empowered in the same manner as it is in the US, particularly in the New England system, where town meetings are the form of government and local governments are so empowered. So this was an opportunity. I've served thus far in the ZAC along with my good friend Mary here. But there was another opportunity. Amy Ritterbusch and I, we know each other from our scouting days. Both our sons go to the same or graduated and with Eagle Scout with just earlier this year. So when the opportunity presented itself, she convinced me, cajoled me a little bit. My wife played a role in that. So I think this is a great opportunity for me to complement the great work that this board is already doing. I hope I can add something to this. Great work has been done. So I don't want to claim that I'm going to get a fresh perspective, but I feel that I can definitely complement the awesome work that is already being done by the planning board in Hopkinton. Hope to learn a lot from everyone, and I'm honored and privileged to be part of this body. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Sundar. And again, welcome to the planning board. So at this point, we'll move to nominations and votes for our vice chair. So at this point, I'll open it up to the planning board and entertain any nominations for vice chair.
I'd like to nominate Dave Paul.
A second.
Dave, do you accept the nomination?
I do not.
Oh,
And just because I can't commit to the extra time that would be needed.
Okay. Well, thanks, Dave. I appreciate your transparency, and better to say that now than a month from now. Are there any other nominations? Yes, Mary.
I nominate Rob Benson.
Second.
that's interesting.
Rob, do you accept the nomination?
I do.
Okay. And are there any other nominations? I'd like to nominate Mary to the vice chair.
Second.
Mary, do you accept the nomination?
Yes, I accept the nomination.
Okay. Are there any other nominations? Okay, and again, I think that we're fortunate. I think we've been building a lot of bench strength here, so excited to see multiple nominations. But I guess the most Muriel, I'm going to defer to you on this, but from a process perspective, should we don't need to vote in the affirmative. We can vote for one or the other. Is that correct? And I guess I'm
Yeah,
wondering
so
if we should allow the nominees to say a few words. I don't know if that's appropriate or not, but curious to
I
get
think
your
it's
take on it.
always entirely appropriate, Gary. And then as long as the vote is a roll call vote, we could roll call and each say the person that we are voting for. That satisfies the need for this for public access taking the voting in this format.
Okay. So let's do that then. I wouldn't mind. I think it's worth just giving both Rob and Mary a chance to say a few words. And since Rob, you were nominated first, do you want to just provide a couple of just a quick some quick comments on your interest in the vice chair?
So first off, I appreciate the nomination. I think I could do a good job just incorporating the voice of the town. I've lived in Hopkinton over 35 years now. Learning the process part, I think, takes everyone a little bit of time. So that's going to be a learning curve for me, but I just appreciate the opportunity, and I would just try to do the best for the board and for the town.
Awesome. Thanks, Rob. And Mary, do you have a few words to add?
Sure. I've been chairing the zoning advisory committee for 2 years, just not quite 2 years, but almost 2 years now. And I know it takes a huge amount of time. And the planning board chair and vice chair, mostly chair, probably takes also a huge amount of time, much more so than the zoning advisory committee. That scares me a little bit, but but I would be honored to take on the challenge. I probably would not accept any further chairmanship of the ZAC if I were to become vice chair of the planning board, just to be, crystal clear. So just based on the available time in the day. So.
All right. Thank you, Mary. So any other
and I think
comments?
Rob would be great.
Any other comments before we move to a roll call vote from the board?
No, I just want to say one thing as a person who has had the great privilege of being a chair and really watching from that perspective, new members come on board and emerge with great strengths. And I have really appreciated both Rob and Mary. They've found their niches. They speak from their places of real perspective and knowledge. And like everybody else on this board, I think there's a great deal of interpersonal respect and the ability to factor in other perspectives with their own and adjust their own perspectives as the bigger picture emerges. So I think we're very fortunate. I really appreciate that both Rob and Mary are willing. They would both do a really terrific job.
Thanks, Muriel, and I echo your sentiments. So we'll move to the roll call vote, and I'll start. So Gary Trendle, and I vote for Mary Larson Marlowe. Muriel?
Muriel Kramer, I vote for Mary Larson Marlowe.
Jane Moran?
Oh, this is a tough one. I know that both of them would do a really fantastic job. I know Mary has her hands full right now, and she said that she would step down as chair, but I'd like to see Rob get a chance at it and see, pull out his talents and give him a chance.
All right, and Deb?
I too think they both make stellar vice chairs. What I've enjoyed seeing as Rob's been growing with our board is he does share a unique perspective. And I think that that should be celebrated. And so my vote is for Rob Benson.
Okay. And Sundar?
Um, I have served with honor with Mary and the Zach, so I've had a great experience of her being chair. So with that in mind, my vote goes to Mary.
Okay. Dave?
So first of all, I just wanted to
Actually, no, sorry, go ahead, Dave.
I'll go right back to you, Gary. So
Yep.
I just want to thank Deb for nominating me. I really appreciate that. People think I would do a good job in that position. I'm going into my 5th year, so I have a lot of experience on the planning board. Getting back to the vote for Rob and Mary, just like everybody else, either one of these guys would do a fantastic job. I know Mary has been involved in the town for a little bit, and I think Rob just needs an excuse to get a little bit more involved. So I'm going to vote for Rob.
Okay, Rob.
I think I am going to cast a vote in affirmative for myself. So I appreciate the nomination, and I'm going to vote for myself.
Okay. And Mary.
And I haven't been keeping a tally, so
I'm not going to tell you what it
Where
is.
we stand right now. But I definitely think Rob would be great. I think there's some value to having slightly newer voices. I almost feel like a veteran after a few years, even though it's only been like 2 years. But I vote for Rob.
Okay. Rob, congratulations. So that's 5 votes for Rob and 3 for Mary. And I will say, I think one of the things that going back to John Ferrari, that John did a really good job of, and I know we've tried some this past year, not as successfully as I would have liked, but I do want to make sure that there are plenty of opportunities for everyone on the board to take leadership roles. And so, Mary, I think you've already done that through Zach. I'd really like to get to a point where we have some rotation as far as as far as facilitating and leading hearings. So I just throw that out there, and I'm excited to work with you, Rob, and excited to have you more engaged on this board. But I think as we move forward, I'm going to continue to ask everyone to take on more ownership than just showing up to the meetings, because I think that, number one, it's really good experience. 2, it helps build bench strength for the future, and 3, candidly, it helps share some of the lift that's associated with this board. So, Rob, I don't know if you have any other further comments. I made a few comments, and there's no pressure here, but make sure to give you a chance to say a few additional words if you like.
No, I appreciate everybody. I appreciate the support. I think Mary would have done a great job too. I don't know exactly what I'm entails being the vice chair, so I'm a little nervous about that, as I'm sure you are, Gary, about being the new chair. But I look forward to the opportunity, and a lot of the process stuff will be learning on the job.
All right. Well, congratulations, Rob, and thanks everyone for. I actually think that the comments are really helpful, and it's nice to hear where people are coming from too. So I know I appreciate that. Let's see, just a quick time check, and we do have some other administrative items to get into that I think should go reasonably quick. But I just before we get into those and we open the public hearings, I just wanted to let the public know 2 things. One, that Buckland and Leonard application, they have requested to continue it, so we'll get to that date in a few minutes. And then also the Maspinock Woods application, they've also requested to continue it. So from an agenda perspective, tonight we have the administrative items. We will discuss when we continue those 2 public hearings to, and then we will move on to the Seaboard Solar application. So just for, I know there's a lot of people that have called in. I think it's safe to bet that a number of them have interest in the Seaboard Solar proposal, but just wanted to give people a heads up that there have been a couple of late changes to the agenda. So the next item on the agenda is our notice of vacancy. And as Muriel already alluded to, Amy Ritterbush, with her election to the select board, has resigned from the planning board effective July 1st. She's been a tremendous asset to the town, and I'm glad that she'll continue to serve in a new capacity. She also leaves some very, very big shoes to fill. I think she was such a important part of this board, and I will forever be grateful to her research and preparation, and really advocating for what she believes in. But the board is required to announce this vacancy. So that's what we're doing now. From a process perspective, um, our town planner will a notice is published in the local media advertising the vacancy and requesting letters of interest from Hopkinton residents. The window to submit a letter of interest is 10 days from the publication of this notice. And then once that time has concluded, the planning board and select board will hold a joint meeting to appoint the new planning board member to serve until the next town election, which is anticipated for, as John says, May/June 2021. So a lot of uncertainty here right now, but we will go ahead and get that posted. And then and Muriel, I'm going to defer to you again here. I'm trying to remember how we go about establishing that date for the select board planning board joint meeting.
So typically, we have joined the select board for their meeting. So it's a coordination effort with the professional staff once the timing is able to be satisfied for the posting of the notice. We will join the select board. It's customary that a chairman is decided at that point. Typically, it has always just been the select board chairs that meeting. And then we, as you know, you went through the process. If we have multiple applicants, which is always a great thing for the town if that happens, we do a little interview. Everybody on the select board and the planning board has an opportunity to ask questions. The applicants have a chance to answer, introduce themselves, and then there is a vote. And we have, since my tenure on the planning board, replacing members, we have, by agreement with the select board, I hope it continues, always made sure we continue the voting cycle until the person who is voted in affirmatively has gotten a majority of the members present. So that if we had 4 or 5 candidates, we wouldn't have somebody that had a majority of the votes, but not a majority of the possible votes. So that has been the process, but that's typically established at the hearing when we're all together.
All right, thanks, Muriel. So I don't think there's anything else for us to do right now, but Stephanie and John and staff will go ahead and get that vacancy posted. But I would encourage people, if they know of someone that's interested, or if they know of somebody that they think might be a good fit, to encourage them to apply. Okay, so the next administrative item is related to a waiver of fees for 79 Franklin Road. And the applicant that submitted the A&R that was approved at the last planning board meeting had the request for the fee to be waived, as they are a nonprofit organization working within the town, otherwise known as HALT. This board needs to vote on whether or not to waive the fee. The fee is administrative, and it's not uncommon for the board to grant this waiver. So
I'll make a motion to waive the fee.
Second.
Second.
Okay, so that was Mary with the second. And actually, I think Muriel started this with the Zoom meetings, but maybe what we can do is if Rob, if there's a customary motion, if you can make that as the vice chair, and then maybe Mary, if you would be willing to offer the second, if you're in agreement with it.
Sure.
Is there any discussion on this waiver of fees? Okay, so no discussion, so we'll move to a roll call vote. And again, just a reminder to state your name when you vote. Gary Trendle, yes. Sundar,
Sundar, yes.
Muriel,
Muriel Kramer, yes.
Jane,
And Moran, yes.
Deb,
Deborah Feinberg, yes.
Dave,
Dave Paul, yes.
Rob,
Rob
Rob,
Benson, yes. Rob Benson,
you.
yes.
Mary.
Mary Larson Marlowe, yes.
Okay, thanks everyone. So that is approved. And then we also, this is something that Amy Ritterbush asked us if we could do, the next item on the agenda. She took on the role somewhat unofficially to take notes on actions taken from the planning board meeting, and then she would in turn distribute that to EHOP and other press entities. This is something that the select board does as well. And I think, again, just in the interest of transparency and keeping people informed about what's happening in our meetings, I think it's a great idea. But of course, with Amy moving on to the select board, we are losing the person who's been doing that for us for the last couple of years. So, I guess my request or my ask is there somebody that would be willing to take on that role for this board?
I would.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd go for it. I of course would ask Amy for some of her format and how and her process, but no, I would appreciate doing that.
Okay. Thank you, Deb. Appreciate you volunteering. And I'd say too that I think particularly as we get going on this too, I'm sure that Stephanie or John could review those as well. But
Right.
I think it's great that you'd be willing to do that. And again, I think it's an important part for this board just to keep people informed for those people that don't want to donate 3 to 4 hours of their Monday night every other week to a planning board discussion. So that's great. Thank you, Deb.
No problem.
And then the last administrative item is we've got some minutes to review. We've got actually the April 27th, May 11th, and May 18th. So I'll entertain a motion to accept the meeting minutes from April 27th, 2020.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, so that was Jane on the motion and Mary on the second. Any discussion or any comments on those minutes?
So I think that, I'm sorry, this is Muriel. I think that it included in the minutes, if I'm correct, the entire list of conditions when we voted on an action. Is that true?
I saw a full list in there.
Yeah. So Stephanie, and to the board, I appreciate the level of attention to detail. That's amazing. I wonder if with the conditions, it would be somewhat more smarter to just indicate that we approved with conditions agreeable to the board and the applicant, because ultimately the final arbiter of the conditions is the statement, is the document that is generated by the office and signed by the chair. And I think just to avoid any kind of unintentional hiccup across the way, that we should have one document that lists the conditions formally for the board.
That sounds like sound advice. So
I agree.
But great job, Stephanie. I feel so bad. You worked so, you did such a great job. So it's not a criticism at all. Really terrific, but I think we should have just the one list.
All right, perfect. That'll save a little bit of time too.
Yeah.
So Muriel, are you recommending that we amend the minutes to remove those?
In this case, I would move that we amend the minutes to have language that says the board approved. I apologize. I don't remember. It's not in front of me whether it was a special permit or site plan or whatever it was. But to approve the decision with conditions that were agreed upon by the board and the applicant. And that could be a consistent statement going forward.
So Actually, as I look through the minutes from the 27th, I think that what you're referring to was
Is that
different
right?
meeting minutes.
Well, that's
Um,
awesome. So I apologize for that.
so what I'm going to
Oh, you covered it
suggest.
for the other one.
Sorry, what's that, Deb?
She just covered it for the next one.
Okay. Well, and what I was
I'm
going to say is that, and I don't know if we can do this, but what I'm thinking is that maybe I'll ask if there are any comments or updates to any of the minutes, and then maybe what we do is we can approve them as a group. Is that appropriate to do? Muriel's.
It's a way. It's a way. If it's
Okay.
amenable to the group, yeah.
Okay.
It is fine with me.
Okay. So let me ask this question then. Are there any comments or updates to either the April 27th meeting minutes, the May 11th meeting minutes, or the May 18th meeting minutes beyond Muriel's comments about the detailed listing of conditions?
To the chair, Gary, it's Dave. It's just a general comment, and it's included in the minutes as well, but I think we can remove Kobe from the distribution on the email.
I think actually Kobe is still reviewing the minutes,
Okay.
just to help Stephanie out through the
Oh,
process.
no problem. I didn't
So-
think she was still part of the administration, but she is. That's fine. Thank you.
She's still,
Thanks for
she's
that
still doing it.
clarification. That's right. She moved to a different role, right?
Stephanie, can you read Dutch shorthand yet?
No, I cannot.
Okay, so are there any other corrections or updates to either any of those three sets of meeting minutes?
No, but I would like to say one thing. Stephanie, I know there's a sharp learning curve and you are following in the footsteps of Kobe Wallace, who is impossible to follow. Honestly, it's an enviable position. And the minutes are really reflecting great detail and clarity, and I really appreciate your efforts. Thank you.
Thank you.
Agreed.
Okay, so then at this point, I'll entertain a motion to accept amended minutes with the specific conditions removed and replaced with a general statement. So those meeting minutes would be April 27th, 2020, May 11th, 2020, and May 18th, 2020.
So moved.
Mary Larson Marlowe, second.
Okay, any further discussion? So we'll move to a roll call vote. Gary Trendle, yes. Sundar,
Sundar, yes.
Muriel,
Muriel Kramer, yes.
Jane,
Jane Moran, yes.
Deb,
Deborah Feinberg, yes.
Dave,
Dave Paul, yes.
Rob,
Rob Benson, yes.
and Mary.
Mary Larson Marlowe, yes.
Okay, so thanks everyone, and Stephanie, again, appreciate all the detail there, and the great work, because I think those are really important to us. I know that many of us go back and refer to them probably more than we would like. So one last thing before we move to opening the public hearings, and we're not going to have any discussion around this, but just wanted to bring people up to date. So we now understand that the assumptions made by the planning board during the discussion for the Franklin Road Solar Special Permit and the Solar Overlay District were incorrect, and that the submission of an application prior to the notice of a planning board hearing for a zoning change does not grandfather its proposed use. So in other words, if you recall, when we were discussing the solar zoning overlay, we had thought that the Franklin Road Franklin Road project, if that was approved and if the solar overlay district was accepted at town meeting, that the Franklin Road project would be grandfathered and allowed to continue. And based on some discussions with town council, we believe that that is not correct. So a special permit must be issued prior to the notification. Therefore, we understand that there may be a conflict in the proposed overlay district, which will preclude the Franklin Road solar development should the article be approved at town meeting, which was not the stated intent of the board during deliberations on the zoning article. So we're currently discussing this issue with town council. We will have this item added to future agenda, likely July 27th, when we can involve both town council and our town planner, John Gilsich. But I also just want to make sure that it's understood that this issue should not affect the deliberation pertaining to the Franklin Road solar proposal, but rather it primarily affects the board's recommendation to recommend and approve the solar overlay district. So I realize this gets a little bit messy, and again, because it's not on the agenda, we're not going to take any questions or discussion about it tonight. But again, in the interest of transparency, wanted to loop all of you in and also serve as notice to all the public that is on this call and that follows this closely, as well as the applicants for the Franklin Solar Project, that we will be having some further discussion on this, most likely at our next meeting. Okay, so we'll move to the public hearings. So at this point, I'll entertain a motion to open the public hearings for Buckland Street and Leonard Street, for Maspinock Woods, and for Franklin Road.
So moved.
Mary Larson Marlowe, second.
Okay, any discussion? If not, we'll move to a roll call vote. Gary Trendle, yes. Jane Moran,
Jane Marin, yes.
Deb,
Deb Feinberg, yes.
Dave,
Dave Paul, yes.
Rob,
Rob Benson, yes.
Mary,
Mary Larson Marlowe, yes.
Sundar,
Sundar Sivaraman, yes.
and Muriel.
Muriel Kramer, yes.
Okay. So as I mentioned, two of those have requested a continuation. So Stephanie, what was the requested continuation for Buckland and Leonard Street?
Leonard had requested for 30 days, but our next meeting that would match that is August 10th.
Okay, and August 10th, we will also have the newly opened hearings for the town meeting articles, which I think I think there's gonna be some good healthy discussion there. I think that's the only meeting we have in August though, correct? Okay. Part of me is tempted just to, I think that's going to be a fairly full agenda. So I'm inclined to push it to the first meeting in September. Is there any thoughts from the board on when we continue Buckland and Leonard 2?
I think that's fair. They've asked many times to have it moved, correct?
They have, yes.
So it doesn't seem to be an urgency.
Stephanie, when would the first meeting in September be?
September 14th.
September 14th. So I'll entertain a motion to continue the Buckland and Leonard Street.
Excuse me, Gary, can I
Yes.
just interject? We do need in this case, we do need the applicant's agreement to extend the decision. So I just want to make sure we consider that, and it is likely that the applicant would consent to that. But I wouldn't want to put us in the position where we were in some sort of conflict with that.
Mr. Chairman, this is Peter Barberi. Can you hear me?
I can, yes, Peter.
Yeah, that continuance is fine with us.
Okay.
Great,
Thank you.
And we will get you an email in that regard tomorrow.
great. Thank you, Peter. So I'll entertain a motion to continue the Buckland Street and Leonard Street public hearing to, Sorry.
Point of order.
yeah, go ahead, Muriel.
Peter, you're the attorney for Maspinock Woods, right?
I'm sorry?
You're the attorney for Maspinock Woods, not Buckland and Leonard.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
So we're discussing Buckland and Leonard.
Yeah,
The hearing that you're interested in continuing is the Maspinock hearing. Is that correct?
yeah, we had to get Conservation Commission approval, which we now have.
Okay, so
there was
it's two
some
different.
confusing reading memos for tonight that certain people weren't going to be there, so we
Yeah.
weren't going to be able to have a vote, and therefore we said let's continue it, but we're all set, but for your board, I don't see construction happening,
So,
before September
Peter,
anyways.
Peter, sorry, we were not talking about the Maspinock hearing. We were talking about a different
I'm
hearing
sorry.
for Buckland Street and Leonard Street. So, good catch, Muriel. I that one slips by me. I feel like we see Mr. Barbieri quite a bit, and I missed that. So we'll get to Maspinock Woods in a moment here.
Yeah, sorry.
But so going back to your original comment, Muriel, are you recommending that we, since they had already requested a month out, that we schedule them for August 10th?
So that would be my preference, because he has requested that, and we can, I think, in full faith, vote the decision for 7 to 10 days after that date. I do know that this applicant has continued many times, and for the last several times, it's been because of the COVID health crisis. And I hardly feel like I'm inclined to hold that against anybody. We're all sort of figuring that out. So I would feel more comfortable with that, even if we end up continuing again. That was my only point.
Okay, that seems reasonable to me. So on that note, I'll entertain a motion to continue the Buckland Street, Leonard Street stormwater management permit and petition to construct a paper street to August 10th, 2020.
Rob Benson, so moved.
Mary Larson Marlowe, second.
It
Any
has to-
further? Go ahead.
It has to include extending the decision date to August 17th as an example. I'm sorry.
Nope. Thank you. I appreciate that. I was thinking it, I just didn't say it. So we'll try this again. I'll entertain a motion to extend or to continue the hearing to August 10th, 2020, and the decision to August 17th, 2020.
So moved.
Mary Larson Marlowe, second.
All right. Any further discussion? So we'll move to the roll call vote. Gary Trendle, yes. Jane?
Jane Moran, yes.
Deb?
Feinberg, yes.
Dave?
Dave Paul, no.
Rob?
Rob Benson, yes.
Mary?
Mary Larson Marlowe, yes.
Sundar?
Sundar Sivaraman, yes.
And Muriel.
Earl Kramer, yes.
Okay. So
Can we also get reminded who is eligible to vote on the Buckland Leonard hearing?
Stephanie, I'll defer to you on that.
Stephanie's we'll have to work twice as hard today.
Just today.
It was getting continued, so I didn't put it in my notes.
Yeah,
Oh,
I
I'm
think
sorry.
John had said I probably would not vote on anything today. So
Correct.
Muriel is probably
That's-
right.
I'm
You
not,
definitely cannot vote.
I'm not eligible to vote.
Hang on.
Sundar, you got the vote to open the hearing, so that was good.
So Buckland,
3, 4, 6. 6 people?
so I have Rob Benson, Jane Moran, and Sundar
Are not eligible.
eligible to vote.
Jane.
That was quick, Stephanie. Very impressed.
Okay. All right. Sorry. Just was checking that as well. So, okay. So I think we can move on to the continuation request for Maspinock Woods.
The chair, just what was the final vote?
It was 7-1.
Okay.
A 7 in favor of continuing, 1 not in favor of continuing.
Okay, but I thought those 3 of those did not count.
Yeah.
Oh,
Is it 4-1?
right. I'm sorry.
Okay, that's fine. Thanks.
Nope, you're absolutely right. Yes, so it'd be 4-1.
Still fine. Thanks.
Thank you, Dave, for correcting me on that.
Through the chair. So with Amy's departure, a maximum of 5 people can vote on Buckland and Leonard.
That's correct.
It's okay.
Yeah, so I think I'm correct here, but the stormwater management permit is a majority. In the petition to construct a paper street, I'm honestly not sure if that's a majority or a supermajority, but the applicant does have the option to withdraw and resubmit if he feels that's appropriate to do so. Any other comments or discussion on Buckland and Leonard Street?
To the shared stage, just for the benefit of Sundar and maybe the audience out there, though, we do experience this every time we have a change in the board, especially that we have just through the transitional period, that any of the applications that carry over, is subject to change in the number of voters.
Thanks, Dave. John had actually explained that. I think I read in his notes for this meeting about why I would not qualify. Yeah.
Okay. So let's move to the Maspinock Woods, and based on Mr. Barbieri's comments, I'll entertain a motion to continue that hearing to September 14th with a decision by September 21st.
Rob Benson, so moved.
Oh, Mary Larson Marlowe, second.
Thank you both. Any discussion on that continuance?
Yes, sorry, this is Dave again. I keep chiming in, sorry, but should we know if everybody's eligible to vote before we start?
Yes, great question. Stephanie.
Sundar and Jane are ineligible to vote for Maspinock Woods.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other discussion? So we'll move to the roll call vote. Gary Trendle, yes. Deb?
Deborah Feinberg, yes.
Dave?
Dave Paul, yes.
Mary?
Mary Larson Marlowe, yes.
Rob?
Rob Benson, yes.
And Muriel?
Carol Kramer, yes.
Okay. So thanks, Mr. Barbieri, for your flexibility. And if we don't see you before the 14th, we'll see you on the 14th.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. So at this point, we will move to the Franklin Road special permit. And I am just going to quickly unmute a couple of people here. So that would be Nick Fasandola, Pedro Rodriguez,
Adam.
and Mr. Costa. Where did Mr. Costa go? Mr. Costa's already unmuted. He has special privileges apparently because he was not automatically muted when he joined.
I can't believe he wasn't voting with us.
All right. Mr. Costa, is there anybody else that I should unmute for this discussion? I'm just thinking.
No, Mr. Chair, just be the three of us, Pedro, Nick.
Okay. And all right. Well, Mr. Costa, do you want to go ahead and start with just a quick update from where we left off at the last meeting?
So I'd be happy to. Thank you. So again, for the record, my name is Adam Costa. I'm an attorney with the firm of Mead, Tellerman and Costa, representing Board Solar in its application for approval from the board in the form of a special permit. We proceeded about a month ago on June 22nd, last session of the public hearing on not only the present application, but also an application for a stormwater permit. And you might recall that at the conclusion of that meeting, the board did vote to grant the stormwater permit. So what we are proceeding with tonight is the remainder of the project. And we had walked through the usual list that's included in the meeting materials, had discussed the various topics that the board includes, from vehicular and pedestrian traffic flow to utilities to lighting and natural resources. And we had checked off most of the boxes. We had been working on addressing those topics for the better part of, I think, 3 or 4 meetings now. So We had closed out many of those topics. There were a couple of them that I had on my list, and I conferred with my client earlier today that we had hoped to update the board on tonight. And then, of course, to address any questions that the board might have. So what I'd like to do with your permission, Mr. Chair, would be to address these couple of topics, allow Nick to update you on our continued proceedings and now completed proceedings before the Conservation Commission, and then quickly turn it back over to the board for questions.
All right. That
So-
sounds great.
Great, appreciate that. So the two topics that I have on my list that were outstanding after the last public hearing, one was a concern that had been expressed, and I can't recall, I don't think it was by a board member necessarily. I think it was by a nearby resident about the potential effect of the project on nearby wells, on well. And we had indicated at that meeting that we didn't believe, because of the nature of the project, that we would have any effect on well water. Sometimes with projects that require, extensive excavation or that sort of earthwork in connection with construction of a cellar or a basement, there may be some problems, but we didn't anticipate anything associated with our project. In that regard, we've had communications over the past 3 weeks with both Sean McAuliffe, the health director, and also with Brian Besso, the health agent. And you should have, because they were submitted to you, they were submitted to John, and I know that he's not present tonight. So maybe he provided them to board members and maybe he didn't. But if he didn't, certainly they've been submitted to the town, because he is the recipient of both of these emails. The first was back on July 2nd, just before the holiday weekend. Sean McAuliffe wrote to John and said that he did not see this project having any negative impact on the wells, referenced Legacy North as having a significantly higher impact, and indicates in his email here that the Fawn Ridge development is topographically cross gradient and down gradient from the proposed solar farm. But he then concluded that email by copying Brian Besso and asking Brian if he saw any issues. Brian followed up on Monday, July 6th, a week ago, and he also sees little to no impact, as most wells are deep and draw from stone aquifer, typically not impacted by surface issues or shallow penetrations into the surface. Again, consistent with the nature of the project that we're proposing. So we think that the opinions of your health director and health agent will hopefully hold some weight with the board and be determinative that there should be no concern with a project of this sort as it relates to wells and potential impact to residents nearby wells. The second topic, and one that we spent a fair amount of time at the last meeting discussing, and in fact, we discussed it for a fair amount of time at the prior meeting as well, is this issue of parking in connection with the trails, not parking required for the project, because again, the nature of the project doesn't prompt the need for significant parking. But we, of course, are making an effort to preserve the trail system as it currently runs through the site. We've had many discussions with the board and offline discussions with HALT about preservation of that trail system. And there was a desire expressed to provide some parking. And prior to the last session of the public hearing in late May and early June, we had done some research not only into the possibilities of parking area in Ashland on property that is no longer a part of this site, but also into the possibility of creating parking elsewhere on this site. Both of those presented concerns and to some extent obstacles from our perspective. Certainly proposing any parking on the actual site itself in proximity to Franklin Road, we saw to be problematic because of its distance from any nearby trailhead, as well as the fact that to gain access to the trails, you would need to walk through a substantial portion of the solar facility, and that presents concerns for us and frankly, concerns for our insurer. But when we had this discussion at the last session of the public hearing, board members suggested that we work a little harder and we look into some other alternatives, some outside the box thinking. We committed at that meeting to have conversations with HALT about what we might do to try and address the issue of parking. And so what we have done over the past few weeks, and again, we submitted documentation to this effect to John. I don't know if it's made its way to board members as of yet, but we have, excuse me?
It has.
Oh, that's great. So we have correspondence here. I won't read it before you. But it's correspondence from Seaboard Solar to the planning board indicating that in an effort to address some of these concerns, we've made a commitment to HALT through discussion with HALT to make a donation to HALT for the purpose of permitting and constructing a parking area that could comprise as many as 3 to 4 spaces, the location at or near the designated open space. That location hasn't been determined. It could be a location that is determined to be on a portion of our property. It could be on other nearby property. We're certainly happy to have discussions, but the idea would be that HALT would have the resources necessary to construct this parking, and to ensure that they have those resources, we put together, and we've done this in one other community, in fact, we put together a quote that is comprised both of the civil design for the parking area, as well as the construction cost to clear the site for purposes of the parking spaces. And then we added a 20% contingency on top of that to determine the amount of the donation that we're willing to make. And Pedro can certainly speak to the particulars of his discussions with the representative from, but my understanding is that HALT is amenable to this. And again, I would hope that they would speak in favor of it, consistent with the conversations we've had with them over the course of the past few weeks. So the correspondence you have is our letter to the board, but also copies of those quotes, a copy of the quote for the civil design, as well as a copy of the quote for the clearing of the area to create 3 to 4 parking spaces. So those were the 2 topics that we were left with at the conclusion of the last session of the public hearing, as being for homework, so to speak, things that we needed to address or attempt to address between the sessions of the public hearing. What I'd like to do, as I had said, is turn it over to Nick Fasandola, so Nick can just briefly describe for the board how we concluded our proceedings before the Conservation Commission, and just a couple of minor tweaks we made to the plan at the Commission's request before obtaining their. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Nick.
Thanks, Adam. Just to kind of give you guys a brief update, we've closed out our Conservation Commission hearing, and they'll be issuing an order of conditions at their upcoming meeting. A few minor changes were requested at our last meeting, which the commission members wanted to see before granting the approval. I can, if you want me to share my screen, I can show those minor changes if that's allowed.
Yes, that would be great. Do I need to enable you to do that?
Yes, you do.
All right. Apologize, I'm looking at the options here. I can make you the host. I don't think I want to do that. Rename, put in waiting room. Let's try over here. Can you? I
Can you just
apologize.
share?
Yeah, if you share, I'm wondering if it'll pop up with a request for me to accept it.
Click the share button a few times. It says host disabled participant screen sharing. So I don't know if it's a general setting you may have to change for the meeting.
Mr. Chairman, having hosted a few of these myself, all I can maybe suggest is if you click on the share screen option on your screen, typically there's an option for multiple participants being able to share simultaneously. And if you click on that option, sometimes it provides that opportunity to other participants in the meeting.
Sorry, I'm scrolling. There we go. All right, let's try that now, Nick.
All right, looks like it's gonna work.
Thank you, Adam. Appreciate that.
Sure.
All right, so this is a zoomed in section of what I'm calling the southerly portion of the array. So we have Franklin Road down here. This is our site access driveway, which will bring us into the array. So the change that was requested by the commission members was to modify the table positioning and the driveway in this area right here. So what we ended up doing was we eliminated 2 array tables and we pulled our driveway in to hug the new array table configuration. Before, the driveway kind of came down here and turned sharply, and then came over and then back up this way. So we just brought that area in. What this does is it keeps all the array tables outside of the Conservation Commission's buffer zone areas, something that they wanted to have us adhere to. We still have our proposed stormwater swale running down the westerly edge of the driveway. I modified it slightly just to follow the new edge of driveway limits within this area. We still have the same amount of site disturbance as we are rehabbing this area all through here. This is all existing pavement in this area, which we're going to be providing restoration plantings in to help restore the buffer zone, which is currently paved in this area here and this area here. So the scope of the overall site disturbance hasn't changed. It's just more the permanent location of the access driveway, and we are short 2 array tables on this last row. Other than that, it was all minor comments from the commission that we addressed with them on their final review, and they issued or voted to issue the order of conditions.
Okay, thank you, Nick. And I do want to get to the public hearing outline, but also want to just open it up quickly to the planning board members to see if there are any questions with regards to the updates that either Adam or Nick provided. Okay. So, and I should also say too, Mr. Costa, the emails from both Sean and Brian were also in our meeting packet, so we're aware of that. So I think we're up to speed on that, and appreciate your efforts to work through those issues, and also your willingness to work with us on the parking for the trail access. So we'll go to the public hearing outline. And I think we are the next, yes, go ahead, Deb.
Sorry, Gary. Jane had her hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry, Jane.
That's okay. I just want to take a quick second to thank Nick, Adam, and Pedro, and especially Maury. Maury's out there somewhere too, for working through those parking issues. That was very important for our town, and I really appreciate the extra work you put into it. Thank you.
All right, and Deb, did you have a comment? So there's one other person that is raising their hand. So, but did you have any other comments, Deb, or questions?
Well, I guess I wasn't really sure where the parking would be on the site. Was there any defined location? I know it was very generous, and I thought it was, again, great research done. And it was mentioned it was a half an acre, but I guess I wasn't really clear as to where that was going to be located, or what
Nick?
the intention was.
Nick or Adam, do you, Nick, since you're sharing your screen, could you help share with us where you're thinking that parking might go?
I think I'll let Pedro address that. He has his hand up.
Yeah, so we don't have a defined space yet, but I know that Maury visited the site and he saw there's already some clearing done near Cross Street, I believe, that people have been parking in there. So there's 2 locations that he had in mind that we could use, but we don't have any specific location. The main reason for the donation that we're making to HALT is so they're free to work with the town on the best location for the parking, and that they have the resources to do it.
Okay, thank you, Pedro. So just to summarize, what you're proposing is that you'll provide the funds necessary to construct the parking, and then leave it to the town of Hopkinton and HALT to identify the best location for that parking access. Is that a fair
Correct, that
summary?
was my intention, yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I should just, since he's on the line, Maury from Halt. Maury, do you have any comments or questions with regards to the trail access parking? And I've unmuted you.
No, I think the amount of donation proposed was going to be adequate for us to build the parking we need. And we have identified a location that seems pretty good. It could run into problems that we're not aware of, but it seems like it won't be an issue.
Okay. Thanks, Maury. And just for the public record, I apologize, but can you just give us your address?
Oh, 28 South Mill Street.
Okay, thank you. And then I have a question from John. So John, if you can just give us your full name and your address.
Sure, this is John Kohler, 72 Franklin Road. So I had two questions that kind of answered one of my parts of the question, but I thought that some of the proposals were to put the parking on what is now considered Liberty Mutual property, which is a distinct and separate ownership. I understand, at least on paper, it's currently owned by the same people, but the applications are being traded separately. And a related question to that is, I don't know whether so if the applications have to be considered on their own, is Seaboard Solar speaking for Liberty Mutual property to donate that possibly donate that land? And then has the implications of any change of those parking, when does the review of the Liberty Mutual portion of the property get impacted? Because I still haven't heard as to whether any of the orders of conditions from when the Liberty property was built, such as egress and then setback requirements from other properties. 71 Franklin Road is now right next to another property. And so how does that setback, does 71 Franklin Road, which is the existing building, have to re-review for planning board implications? Thank you.
Great questions. And I have some initial thoughts, but I'm wondering, Mr. Costa, if you can probably speak to that better than I can.
Sure, Mr. Chairman. So I can speak to it in part, and then I'm also going to allow Pedro to speak to it as it relates to ownership and control, because I'm not Seaboard Solar's real estate attorney, and so I've not handled acquisition, disposition of real property. I handle permit on behalf of the company. So what I can tell you is that we were at research some time ago, late 2019, the issue of the existing permit that went into effect for the Liberty Mutual property in early 2002. And we reviewed that permit very carefully. We reviewed the zoning existence at that time. We reviewed zoning changes that have occurred since then. And then, of course, we had in hand at that time what had yet to be submitted to the planning board, which was a proposal for the solar facility. And the concerns that we had with respect to the decision issued for the Liberty Mutual property, and for that building specifically in the professional office, which I understand was created in part for purposes of that project. The concern we had was, to what extent would any of the conditions of that decision possibly be adversely affected by division of the property so as to facilitate the commercial solar project? And we identified a couple of things, and I'm not telling you anything that some of you may not already know, because the opinion that I prepared for my client has since been shared with the town and with the board, I believe. But what we were concerned about in particular was a requirement in that decision that there be a certain area of open space preserved in connection with that project. And a portion of that open space, it didn't specify where that open space had to be. In fact, it just referred to it generally as undisturbed open land. There were representations made to the board at the time that it would be a certain size, a certain area. And we wanted to be sure that in reconfiguring the site, so to speak, so as to facilitate the solar project, we would still have that same area of undisturbed open land associated with the mutual building. And so I provided those parameters to Nick And Nick was very careful in designing the A&R plan for the property so as to ensure that that's exactly what would occur. So it's my opinion that the requirements of the original permit are satisfied. There is there's not necessarily a need to amend the original permit that issued for the Liberty Mutual building, so long as all of the conditions of that permit can continue to be complied with. If there were a new use proposed for that building, if there were a redesign to that proposed, modifications to the structure, modifications to the parking, like any other type of special permit, the special permit would need to be modified if any of the bylaw requirements are triggered. So I can't speak to future use or potential need to modify the permit. All I can say is that in terms of the existing conditions of that permit, and specifically the requirement that a minimum of 40% of the development site remain undeveloped, we've been very careful in designing this to ensure that we're going to leave that Liberty Mutual building in a state where it's continues to be protected by that special permit that issued in 2002. And with that, I'll turn it over to Pedro. Pedro, you have anything to add concerning acquisition, disposition, ownership, control?
And I should just say, I think I'm speaking for Mr. Kohler here, but I think he was specifically interested in parking, in the parking lot, and where
Also
that might fit in. Oh, sorry, go ahead, John.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, but also specifically, so the parking, but then also specifically, they've eliminated the egress from the Liberty property. That Liberty property no longer complies with the planning board requirements to have because the driveway that is now being used for this Seaboard Solar was the defined egress for 71 Franklin Road. So right now you're double dipping in terms of you've created a hardship for 71 Franklin Road based upon you're redefining the property lines to include the driveway. So that you're absolutely correct. Is the second part of it was the money for parking appears to the only place to put parking is on the now Liberty property. But thank you.
Yes, Pedro.
Yeah, I just wanted to add a little to that. So yes, the two parcels are owned by two different entities. The solar parcel per se has the area that includes the driveway, but that entity provided an easement to the building parcel to overpass that driveway in order to maintain the legality of the access for that building.
Does that answer your question, John? So there's an easement that
Right,
provides that egress for the site.
There's an easement, but it doesn't comply with the original. But yeah, I guess you get into legalities in terms of ownership, and it is no longer part of that property. They have an easement, but I'm not smart enough to understand that it truly is not the same ownership, and you're double counting that same amount of land. But I'm sure that the lawyers have figured it all out in terms of that double counting. So it's just frustrating.
Okay. And I appreciate you bringing it up, and I just made a note of it. And I think we can go ahead and check in with John on that as well, just to confirm that or to evaluate whether or not there is an issue of some kind there. And then I guess to your second part of your question, specific to the parking, and again where that might be located. Pedro, do you have any further comments on that? I'm operating the assumption that the parking lot would not be on that lot 2 area, that it would be someplace else. But correct me if I'm wrong, and maybe if you can help answer that question from Mr. Kohler.
Yeah, I mean, the short answer to that is that the building is empty right now, looking for tenants. We can really commit, that is, we can accommodate 4 or 5 or 6 parking spaces to the use of the open space. Again, we're donating this money to HALT so they can pursue the permit and the construction of the parking to the best location as possible. But that's all. I mean, we're up to HALT and the town to kind of come together to what is the best location of the parking.
Okay.
If that
Thanks,
makes sense.
Pedro. And we've
Sorry,
got, yes,
point
go
of-
ahead, Dave.
Point of clarity there. I wasn't sure if that was a yes or a no when you asked the question whether the parking lot could be on lot 2.
It will, if I could offer some clarity. So the parking lot will not be on lot 2. And so I can appreciate the previous speaker can appreciate the question, because there was some discussion at the last session of the public hearing when we were talking about different options for parking placement. There was some discussion about, and I think one, maybe two board members asked the question, could there be the placement of parking on lot 2? Could we utilize any of the existing parking spaces that are associated with, that are pertinent to the Liberty Mutual building? Could those be dedicated to use for trails? And Pedro was very firm at that meeting and said that's not an option. He also referenced the fact that it would be sort of difficult based upon where that parking would be to provide access to the trailhead through an area that is wet. We ended up getting into a bit of discussion about the reality that for the purpose of creating trails, sometimes you can create trails through an area that is wet. But the long and the short of it was, we said at the last meeting, and we're continuing to say now, that that's not really an option. It's also not ideal. And when we began to look at other options along the perimeter of the site, in closer proximity to trailheads, and began to explore those with HALT, I think it became apparent, and I'll let Mr. Gasser speak for himself, that there were better options, just costlier options, because there would need to, the HALT would need to sort of bear the burden of the cost and expense of designing the parking area and clearing the land, which is what prompted our donation.
Okay, so I know that that Ms. Ober had her hand up first, but just want to continue off of what Mr. Costa just said. So, Maury, do you have any thoughts on preferred parking locations on the solar lot?
Yes. To be specific, we're looking at, there's an access road to the dam that has a gate across it at Cross Street. And that's perfectly level area. And simply by moving the gate back some number of feet, we could easily put a parking area right there, just kind of behind the trees right at Cross Street. And that would be in the solar parcel, wouldn't have anything to do with the professional office building area. We're also thinking possibly a couple of roadside pullouts on Franklin Road. We'd have to do some clearing there on the north side of Franklin Road by the, there's a lot of space between the road and the stone wall along Franklin Road. If we can have them get permission to clear those, the brush there, we can have roadside parking similar to what we have already at Wiley Woods. Okay. And they would have access also to one of the trails.
Okay, thanks, Maury. And I'm just going to take one more question here before we move on to the outline. But Ms. Ober, you are unmuted, and the mic is yours.
I just also want to say congratulations to you, Gary. Gail Ober, 17 Fawn Ridge Road. I understand we're talking about two things here, the parking, and we spoke about the well water. And while I understand that this is the subject matter, as an abutter, I just want to state again how upsetting it is and almost insulting it is to me, sorry, that you're discussing parking when I'm sitting in my home thinking about the clear cutting of land that's going to happen in my backyard, the destruction of environment, the displacement of animals, our property values, and our well water. That being said, while I appreciate, Mr. Costa, what you said and the professional verbiage that you used at the beginning of this discussion about well water, I have some major issues with it. And I don't understand, I would like to understand, I would like to get the name of the two people in the town that you spoke to. I would like to understand if there was a site visit from either of these two people. I would like to understand if there was any type of evaluation done by these two people that you named, and are they an expert in this area? And if I just Googled whether there is a challenge of what the impact of solar power is on well water, I can read to you, or the groundwater, I can read to you very quickly one quote that it says that there is always a risk of some kind of spill, which could result in these chemicals leaching into the soil and contaminating the groundwater. And that's just Googling it. So while I appreciate the information that you told us, and while I appreciate that you went to 2 town officials, I would like to get backup information on how they came to that everything is going to be just fine, or that this will not be an issue.
So, Ms. Obert, I appreciate your concern, and I know just from previous comments that multiple people on this board are also on well water and very always very cautious about that. Mr. McAuliffe is our director of health, this is his specialty. Maybe it's not his specialty, but he is responsible for evaluating situations like this. And then the Brian mentioned is Brian Basso, who is one of our health agents for the town of Hopkinton. I just want to add one thought on this, and to be candid, I am not an expert on environmental engineering and contamination risks and mitigation. We as a board have to rely on our professional staff to help guide us this. That's one of the reasons that we use Beta Engineering. And that's one of the reasons that in situations like this, we do reach out to our professional staff that do have expertise in this space. And candidly, you know, I'm of the mindset that we should take their guidance and advice very seriously. So I'd recommend that you reach out to Mr. McCullough first. Like I said, he is a town official, and I suspect that his contact information is available on the town website. But you know, he should be able to provide more detail about how they made this assessment. And you know, probably some information for you as well on his credentials and his reasoning for his comments in the email.
I don't negate that at all, Gary, and I completely respect what you're saying, and I do respect our town officials, and I will reach out. It just feels like, oh, we reached out to these people, they said it would be okay. You just have to understand that that's how it feels to me or to us, and I will reach out to ask for some more evidence, and I will have conversations with them. It's concerning. That's all. So thank you.
Through the chair, this is Dave. May I ask a related question to the applicant?
Yes, please go ahead, Dave.
So I'm well aware of, you know, like a solar facility's electricity, so there shouldn't be any liquids throughout the facility. However, there is the battery. So I just wanted to ask, is there any liquids involved in the battery storage?
Yeah, to answer that question, there's not going to be any liquid in the energy storage that we're using. Also, to add to that, the container where the energy storage is going to be located is what's it called? It's sealed. So if there's anything that were to happen inside that container, it's not going to leak or leave that area. And if something goes, which we don't expect to happen, if something were to go wrong, it's going to be an automatic system that's going to notify us right before that.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Pedro. And I did have one other person wanted to make a comment. I'm not sure what the name is, but it's under Bianta.
Yes.
So if you could just introduce yourself and provide us with your address, and then you can go ahead and ask your question or make your comment.
Thank you. My name is Bob Ionta. I'm at 50 Franklin Road. I have a comment and a question. My comment is that I just wanted to register my disappointment with the process, that the town doesn't seem to have the ability or perhaps the will to really ensure that projects like this happen in appropriate spaces, because I continue to believe that this is just not an appropriate space for a project of this type. It's an industrial type of a project, and this is a residential neighborhood. That said, my question relates to what you, the chair, said earlier in the meeting about the grandfather clause
and with regard to the solar overlay district. And I didn't quite follow that. I was hoping you could elaborate and explain what would happen to this project based on either direction of a vote on the solar overlay.
So unfortunately, Bob, and I think it's a fair question. I can't really provide any further guidance on that because that's specific to the solar overlay, which is not on our agenda tonight. So my intent of making a comment earlier was really just one, to keep the board informed that it would be on a future agenda item, and then also to inform the public and the applicant that it would be on a future agenda item. But we're not prepared to discuss about what implications might be or how we deal with that. So I apologize.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so appreciates everyone's patience as we work through those updates. And I think as I look at the outline, the next one is I think also going to be one that is going to likely generate some discussion. So that would be item 6.16, screening of trails. So Nick, is that do you want to provide the overview on that topic, or Pedro or Adam? Is it somebody else that will?
Sure, I can do so. Let me just pull up the landscape plan, which we have prepared. So this landscape plan was submitted in, I believe, early June with the plan set. This is the most recent and current plan set that has been submitted to the planning board's office. What we have here is we have a perimeter landscaping and screening trees. Oops, sorry about that. Trying to zoom in. Up along the north side of the array. Fawn Ridge Road is up in this area up here. So we're proposing a double row of plantings along this entire length of the proposed solar array, which will also provide screening along this existing trail, which we are maintaining through this section right through here. There's also an existing trail which runs through this area. We're relocating a 300-foot section of this trail to straighten it out, and we'll reconnect to the existing trail in this area right here. We've extended some additional plantings along the proposed detention basin through this area right here to provide some additional screening to the cleared area for the detention basin. Our double row of screening also continues down the westerly portion of the site. We have the existing trail running up along the edge here, and we have the landscape area right up along the edge of the proposed gravel drive. We also have some screening plantings proposed in the corridor along the gas line easement. We have minimal plantings throughout that area, just as a way to provide some screening, but the gas company also wants us to keep the entire easement area free and clear of any obstructions through that area. So we were still able to get decent screening plantings throughout this area right through here. And we have recently added some additional screening plantings around this proposed basin area where we have the least amount of setback to 67 Franklin Road right through here, about 75 feet to the property line. The house is much further than that. It's about 300 plus feet away, located in this area, but we wanted to add some additional screening through this area right here. Additional plantings in the southerly portion of the site include the restoration area, which I was speaking of. We worked on this area with the Conservation Commission. We have some red maples and red oaks located right at the edge of the area, so they don't interfere with our shading area of the panels. And then we're providing some high-value wildlife shrubs such as blueberry bushes, elderberry, and some St. John's wort planted throughout this area in here. That essentially describes the proposed landscape plan. As previously discussed at our hearings about a month ago, we discussed doing some landscape perspectives. So with the permission of some abutting property owners who reached out to us to have these areas surveyed and documented, this is a landscape perspective from 17 Fawn Ridge Road. So I went out to the property and met with Mr. Ober, and we looked at where we were at their property and looked towards the site and identified, the area where there was the least amount of vegetation, and we flagged that line all the way out to the solar array, and then we went out and surveyed this area, detailed every tree over 6 inches, and documented the general ground cover, and we provided some pictures on the plan. And then we also provided this perspective drawing, which takes into account elevation and provides a detailed sight line that is viewed from the property in question towards the solar array. No additional plantings have been added, but I believe Pedro
Nick.
wants to add something to.
Yeah,
the
just really quick.
Go ahead,
Nick,
Pedro.
yeah, Nick, can you go back to the landscaping plan for a second?
Sure, Pedro.
I just want to mention something real quick. One thing I just want to state that I have been in communication with 2 neighbors or butters from the property that got in touch with me last week and today. So this landscaping has not been finalized. They asked that we added some plantings from their property, which we're going to do. We're coordinating with them directly. So we're, just so you guys know, we are talking to them in the idea of adding some extra landscaping inside the existing landscaping of the property that won't require any more clearing. Maybe adding an escrow account to add extra trees in case that more screening needs to be added after this solar project is finalized. I'm also wanting to add that, Nick, if you go to the types of trees and the randomized design, so the trees that we selected were the ones that were advised or suggested from HALT, also from the Planning Board, also from the Conservation Commission. I confirmed with the arborists that all of these are deer resistant and also evergreen. And the idea is that we're going to have a randomized design that has 2 rows of trees. So that way we can ensure the maximum screening from the neighbors, but also having some type of natural feeling along the trail. So this design that we have right now was coordinated with HALT and also the comments that we received from the public, Conservation Commission and Planning Board. But I just wanted to just reiterate that we haven't finalized it. We've received comments from 2 neighbors and we just didn't have time to update the plan for tonight. That was all.
Thanks, Pedro.
All right. Thank you, Pedro.
So yeah, those properties, I believe that Pedro was speaking of are 65 and 67 Franklin Road, where we're going to be adding some additional screening or providing a screening allowance in this area to help fill any gaps of sight lines that may be problematic or concerning to those abutters. A second landscape perspective that was done is from, I'll show it on the site plan, 65 Franklin Road, which is located, the house is where my hand is right here in this area. So that's another abutter that reached out to us. We met with on site at their property. examined the sight lines from the dwelling and identified the area that has the least thick existing vegetation or screening. So then we went out and surveyed that area, located all the trees within say about 20-foot corridor, and plotted all those trees and provided these landscape perspectives through these areas, so the homeowners can see the type of screening and existing vegetation, along with the distance that they are going to be away from the proposed solar array.
Nick, just a question. And this particular elevation, it looks like some of the panels are maybe slightly above the house. Can you just, I can't quite read it, but can you tell me about approximately how high above the grade of the house the solar panels might be?
Sure. So say the ground elevation of the house is roughly, where we shot it, we'll call it 372 plus or minus. And the ground elevation of the panels is roughly 386. So we have about a 12-foot difference. Probably I'd call it a 16-foot difference to get to the top of the panel. So you can see that grade difference. On the previous perspective that we did, it's essentially a straight shot all the way through. There's a little dip that comes up through here on the existing Halt property. But from here on, it's a relatively straight shot. There's a couple foot elevation difference between the panels and what I'm calling a 6 foot tall individual staring out from the house towards the array.
Okay. So what if you're 6'8" instead of 6 feet tall?
I wouldn't know.
Just kidding. Sorry. But just to clarify though, and what's the estimated sizing on the screening? Because I guess I'm just curious. I just want to make sure to get some sense as to how effective the screening is going to be given the elevation changes.
Sure. So the typical planting is likely going to be anywhere. We give specifications on the table. So roughly between 5 and 6 feet high, installed height for the Western arborvitaes, the rhododendrons, the red cedars, Norway spruces, green giant arborvitaes. The hemlocks we're specking at 3 to 4 feet. They do grow rather quickly. So we feel that that's an appropriate size for that plant at the time it's planted. So those are the planted heights that the contractor is going to have to comply with when they order the landscaping plants.
Okay, thanks, Nick. Any questions or comments? We'll start with the board members. Any questions or comments on screening? Yes, Jane, go ahead.
Sure. So the planted height is 3 to 4 feet or 5 to 6 feet. What's the estimated height of when they're full grown, if you can tell me?
It all depends on how they're maintained and if they're trimmed and what goes along with that. We would hope they're allowed to vegetate to about 10 feet high. We don't want them growing wild and encroaching onto the trails because we do have limited space in this area and we're providing the 2 rows of screening. So there will need to be some maintenance along the edge of the existing trail. We don't want them to wash out the existing trail area, but yeah, we're hoping that they would get between 10 to 12 feet to provide an adequate screen.
Yeah, I just wanted to.
Just a quick follow-up.
Go ahead, Jane. Sorry.
I don't know who's going next. Just a quick follow-up. So I take it that you're going to be doing the maintenance and the trimming?
Yes, as I stated in the previous meeting, I just wanted to confirm that we are going to be doing the maintenance of all the landscaping, even though if it ends up in the open space parcel. And also wanted to add that most of these trees, the hemlock, Western arborvitae, red cedar, Norway spruce, and the green giant, we have them in our solar projects right now, and they are between 10 to 12 feet. And they can grow a little higher too.
Well, I'd like to commend you on your variety. I think this is very attractive and not really seen in a lot of other solar displays. Now, how about watering? I know the first year or so they need to be watered. Would you planning to do that as well?
Yeah, so usually when we do the landscaping, the contractor in the contract, he's required to provide the water on a custom base, and we also the when we get the trees, we have a warranty of a year. So in case any of those dies, will be replaced right away.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Thanks, Jan. Great questions. Rob?
A solar array of this size is going to have some reflective nature to it. It's going to, whether it's nighttime, it's going to reflect moonlight, and during the day, there's going to be some reflective nature of sunlight. Especially at night, how the screening, it seems like there's a realistic chance it's going to be like a giant flashlight where moonlight can reflect off of just acres of solar panels, and no matter what screening is available, there is this giant reflective nature of the solar farm. What has your experience been in other projects, and how do you combat that, or can you combat that at all?
Yes, we're actually using anti-reflective panels. That's the one that we're speccing every single project, which are the same that are used on the side of the highway. And this is so they don't shine during the night or during the day.
Is there any documentation on how they compare to another kind of like a reflective panel? Because even something that says non-reflective, it's got to meet some specification for reflectivityness, whatever that measurement it is. So it's not zero, it's still reflecting some light.
I will supply the documentation, but that was included in the application. We submitted a package with the specs of every single equipment that we are proposing, including the solar panels. But I'll provide you a summary by the next meeting.
Will this, okay, so my last part of my question is, through the chair, will this screening, if there is some reflective nature, especially of a solar array this large, there's going to be some reflective nature. Is the screening going to have any impact? Because the light's going to go up above the tree line.
Pedro, do you want to?
I mean, sorry, I didn't know it was directed to me. Again, I will supply documentation to next to the next meeting. We really haven't had that issue. I mean, we have several projects throughout the state, and not just us. Since we're just the business that are using this type of panel, we haven't had a reflective issue that I know some other solar panels had. So that's the answer.
And Pedro, if I can add to that, I know that Mass DOT, I think if I recall, it's been a while since I've read the study, but I think in conjunction with DEP had done some investigation and analysis of under the Clean Energy Program of solar panels, specifically those with anti-reflective properties, because of the desire to use them along the sides of highways. And also another issue is using them in proximity to airports. Obviously in close proximity to airports, due to both mass aeronautic and FAA requirements, there can't be obstructions of a certain height, but solar panels, because of their limited height, are a potential use for those properties. And so there's been a real desire to develop or encourage development of area in proximity to airports with solar panels. But of course, a concern would be glare with respect to not just sunlight and moonlight, but with respect to the lights of the airport, as well as the lights of incoming aircraft. So I'll see if I can put my fingers on that. But I do recall that there was a study indicating that there are certain types of panels that can be used that have this anti-reflective, anti-glare character that will be safe in these locations.
Great, thank you.
Mr. Chair, if I may suggest something.
Yes.
So if there is already a project or multiple projects that this company has done with the same kind of screening, with the same kind of solar arrays, maybe some pictures can be provided from those sites, maybe nighttime pictures, just for us to have a general idea of how the screening looks, as well as how reflective this is, whether it is unobtrusive or disruptive.
That the chair, that kind of jumps into what one of my concerns that I've noticed is that there's a heavy use of hemlocks. And I was wondering if I could ask Pedro, or if he's the one to ask, is there a reason why the hemlock was chosen sort of in the significant, very regimented pattern as closest to the fence?
Yeah, so we have used, just to add to the previous question, we have no problem taking the pictures during the nighttime, but just to add, we haven't ever created a landscaping design that is so complex to this. I mean, we're adding a very particular design to this to recreate the natural feeling. So we'll take pictures just to prove that there's no glare during the night or during the day, but the landscaping with the zigzag pattern and the randomized trees, I won't be able to prove that because we haven't done that before. But to answer the question about the hemlock is because we have used it in the past. It is very sturdy, it is deer resistant, and it also grows very fast. It grows also wide. So we put it in the back just to supply as much screening as possible. We have the other types of tree in front that provide a natural feeling. But we're open to suggestion. I mean, the hemlock was one of the suggestions that we got in the past from the other boards held and the neighbors. If you guys have any other recommendation with the trees, I'm open to it.
Yeah, I'd recommend looking at that again. I have a few hemlocks that I bought from Weston Nurseries that have grown. They grow fast, and they do screen, but they get really, really scrawny, and they die. Their branches die at the bottom, and they get spindly. So they get spindly and wide and sort of uncontrolled. And I'm just not sure they're representative of what's out there. So I'm just not sure that that's the solution. You said you've used them before. Would we be able to get some pictures of the sites where you've used them before?
Yeah, I can get you some pictures, Deborah. And if actually what I can also do, I'll reach out to the nursery with other choices that are similar to hemlock, and that will also address the issues or concerns that you had. So I'll provide that for the next meeting.
Thank you.
Thanks, Pedro. And Mary, I think you have a question or a comment. And Mary, you're muted. You're not muted on.
Okay, now
There
I'm
you
not muted. Thank you. My comment or question was general in relation to the screening and landscaping. Are you going to be responsible for the life of the solar array, or is it written into agreements for a sale that the screening will be maintained? Again, it kind of goes along with what Deb was even saying about as trees grow, they die, and certain areas don't become very good at screening anymore. So I'm just wondering the lifetime maintenance of this. Is that something that Seaborn Solar is going to be responsible for?
Yes. So the operational maintenance plans, we hire an operational maintenance company to take care of not just this project, but the entire portfolio. And that includes technical, electrical, and landscaping of the project. If any tree deaths, they will be replaced. It's just a little bit more drastic in the first year because that's when trees tend to die. So that's when the actual contractor, the planting, is responsible for checking on the site, very constant. But after that year, yes, the O&M company will come to the site and do the same landscaping.
And Mary, just to add to that, and we haven't gotten to conditions yet, but one of the proposed conditions is a performance guarantee specific to screening. So there is a bond that will help with that. It's good for 5 years, so it's not forever, but it's long beyond the actual construction of the site.
Okay, yeah, and it's really it is beyond that I'm thinking as well. Is just in our own yards, we know that 10, 20 years down the road, things do not look the same. And it may require supplementation. So,
Yeah, and to add to that, we have no problem extending that condition to the lifetime of the system, same as the other bonds.
okay, thank you.
Thanks, Pedro. Any other questions or comments from the board, or if someone from the public has a comment specifically to screening, you can raise your hand in Zoom and we can go ahead and take your question or comment. Okay. I don't see any. Oh, is there somebody that's calling in the phone?
Yes. Yes.
Hi,
Yes.
Ann. We
Hi.
can hear you. If you can just
Okay.
introduce yourself and your address, and then you can go ahead and state your question or comment specifically related to screening.
Okay. This is Ann Karnofsky, and I live at 132 East Main, and I enjoy the complete forest every day, and I did expect to be able to enjoy it for as long as I live. I'm pretty old, and I'll comment intermittently. And the short comment I have to make on the screening is that I keep hearing arborvitae, and in one of the earlier planning meetings, Pedro agreed not to use those. Those don't belong there. They're not native species. That's
Okay.
all.
Thanks, Ann. And I think Pedro or Nick, as I'm looking at the list here, it looks like there's still some of them. I didn't hear you mention those, but have you made any changes on the screening plan specific to the arborvitae?
We had standard arborvitaes detailed before, which we replaced with the
Ones that were suggested to us.
Yeah,
one
the
of
green giant.
The green
rhododendrons.
giants. Okay,
Yeah, because
Yeah.
they're deer resistant.
got it.
Yeah, I mean, pretty much every tree that we specified here was recommended to us. We changed all of that except for the hemlock, which we're also open to change if there are any other suggestions.
Okay. Thanks, Pedro. And then I have a question from Miss Ober. And Gail, I'm unmuting your phone. Hopefully it is unmuting here. All right, Gail, go ahead.
Hi, Gary. It's Scott Ober this time, 17 Fawn Ridge Road. I have a quick question. Is the fencing that's going to be around the site part of this screening discussion, or is that going to be discussed separately?
That's a good question. I'm just checking the outline here, and I don't see something specifically on fencing. I feel like we talked about it previously, but I'm comfortable talking about it now because I think that does serve as part of the screening. Do you have a question about it?
Yeah, I think the plan calls for just galvanized chain link fence. And I think that we need to have a detailed discussion about how we can do better than that if this is going to happen. You know, there was to screen the trails to make it look more natural, and obviously for the neighborhood to make it look as natural as possible. And I think the galvanized chain link fencing is probably the easiest option for the applicant, but maybe not necessarily what's in our best interest.
And also when the leaves
No,
are
he's
off the
not gonna
tree.
let us both talk.
Okay.
All right, that's all I have.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Obert. Pedro, I mean, I know in some other plans that there's applicants have considered, you know, a coated or a colored galvanized, which I think just might blend in a little bit more. But I'm curious if that's something you've considered, if that's something you would be open
Yeah,
to. Here.
we can consider that. We'll think about it and come up with a solution for that.
Okay. Are there any other questions or comments with regards to screening or screening for trails? Okay. So I think we've got one follow-up item there, but again, appreciate it, appreciate Seaboard's
sorry, Gary.
flexibility and willingness to work with us. Yes, Muriel.
I do have one question. This is our first time through trying to do screening better than the last time we did it. And I understand that there's a look back, a process up to 5 years to ensure that it is adequate. I guess I want to ask, just because we're doing this for the first time and we're trying to be successful at really screening neighboring properties from this operation, is there any mechanism, a specific mechanism whereby we can go back and make changes? Just what exactly is entailed in the 5-year adequacy plan, look back plan? Like, do we need a more detailed, our bylaw says fully screened year round. And that's new. And I'm not thinking we're going to necessarily hit the ball perfectly into play the first time following that bylaw. So is there a way to put into the decision that we will work during that 5 years in some collaborative fashion to make sure that that screening is really really year round?
So I think that's an interesting question. And the performance bond on screening, I think, is specifically to address if the applicant or the developer doesn't maintain it. I'm wondering if this applicant, whether it be any one of the three of you, has any thoughts on. I'm just thinking, is there even some way to, withhold or put into reserve some funds just for future maintenance? That would be accessible. There'd be some process so that if trees die or if something happens or something's not working very well, that there's some funds, whether it be part of the bond or something separate from the bond that could be used for ongoing maintenance.
Yeah, so to add to that, what I have done in the past, besides the performance guarantee on the landscaping, is we do have a separate escrow account. I think it lasts 3 to 5 years, depending on the projects in the town. And for the purpose of that escrow account is to add more trees if needed. So in the event that we come to an agreement with this project, we move forward with it, we do the landscaping that was approved, and then the neighbors, the voters, or the town think that more landscaping is needed, that money is there for us to do it. And we will agree in that condition that we'll move forward and plant more trees if needed, in coordination with the neighbors and the town, if that makes sense.
Muriel, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I really appreciate that. As I asked the question, we thought we had done a really great job the last time, and in that particular project landed in the Globe this weekend. So clearly we didn't do an excellent job, and we tried to do a great job, and I believe that the applicant tried to do a great job. And I just want to make sure that there is some mechanism where we can ensure that we really effectively screen year-round this project. And I think I really appreciate that notion of an escrow account so that we can ensure that we get it right, understanding that we may not be on the money the first time, the first planting, the first idea, the first go around. We really are very serious. We undertook that zoning change to ensure that projects of this nature are fully screened from neighboring properties. And so that makes sense to me if it's amenable to the applicant. I don't know how the rest of the board feels.
I think it's a great idea. And I guess my only question for Pedro is, how do you determine what that amount is? I'm trying to be reasonable here, but it sounds like you've got some experience with it.
Yeah, so the way that we have done in the past is that we come up with an estimate what the construction of the landscaping will be. And then you say, okay, look, if the entire landscape is going to cost whatever, $100,000, then you allocate a fifth to that, a quarter to that, to an escrow account, because to add more trees within a period of 5 years.
Okay. So somewhere around 20% of the total budget you would put into an escrow account.
Yeah.
Okay. Anybody else on the board have any thoughts on that concept? Yeah, Jane?
Just a quick comment on that. I think part of the problem with the other project was not so much the landscaping, although that was a piece of it, but it was the grade, the slope that went up. So it's really hard to do protective landscaping when the grade is so steep. I don't think that that actually is this case in this scenario. I think it goes the opposite way. The slope goes downhill where it's not so much of a cut, but I think it's a great plan to have going forward to continue to analyze it as we move forward, giving ourselves a little time.
And I just want to go in order here. Rob, you had your hand up?
Yeah, and as it relates to through the chair, as it relates to screening, what's the sequencing in terms of just project development? This is going to be a big construction site for a period of time. It's going to take. It's not going to be like here's a forest today and a solar array tomorrow. So in terms of basically blocking the nearby residents from the construction as well as the finished product, is the plan to put in screening or basically block the view of the construction site prior to construction, or is it landscaping is the last thing to go in, so this whole solar array will be here for a period of time before landscaping?
So the landscaping wouldn't go in before you clear the property. As you can see on the plan, it would to very extensive landscaping plan. You need to have access to that area. We could work with a condition that has us install the landscaping once the site's been cleared and the gravel driveway has been installed. At that time, they would likely be installing the fencing at that for the site once the driveway area has been installed. So we would look to try and get at least the northerly portion of the site of that landscaping in. As detailed in the plans, the construction would likely start up in this knoll of the site here. So they would, go out, come in, clear the site, construct the driveway, roughen the basin locations, and get all their temporary erosion controls in that are going to be in existence throughout construction. And then, the plan has these notes that, we're going to be working our way from the back of the site towards Franklin Road. So, almost like a phased installation, but not a fully phased installation. So this area will be prepped, and the racking will go in, panels will be installed, and we'll hydro seed this area. Then we'll move on to the next area. Then we'll cross over the easement and continue on. So it'd be reasonable to install the landscaping once the driveway is installed. We could have, like I said, a specific condition, that once this area is fully graded and the driveway's installed, we would install this portion of landscaping through here, and then we can work on some other language for the abutters towards the south, because I believe the major sight lines which we're trying to minimize the impact to are the residents to Fawn Ridge Road and the residents over at 65 and 67 Franklin Road. So we would appreciate or be amenable to some type of sequencing condition that details a requirement for landscape install in those areas.
Through the chair, I think that'd be a great amendment to include.
Or sorry, Rob, an amendment in what sense?
And basically have
a condition.
I meant a condition, exactly.
Okay, and specifically just being, sorry, can you just restate what your proposed condition would be?
having basically additional screening go in with kind of the boundary fence and the gravel driveway. At the time those are installed, have additional plantings along the fence line, additional trees go in at the same time.
Okay. Or I'm going to assume that that would be after, because I don't think you'd want to, or I guess I'd say after the fence goes in, because I'd worry a little bit about damaging the plantings if you're installing the fence and doing any road work. That'd just be my inclination. But is that amenable to the applicant that at least
that's-
I think that northern boundary that screening be installed as early as possible in the construction sequence?
Yeah, and to add to that, we will want that condition not to be just in northern boundary, but also to the other residents along Franklin Road and 60.
Yeah, good point.
So, and just to add to that, one of the first things that we want to do as soon as we do the gravel driveway, as soon as we stabilize the site, is to put this fence as soon as possible, and that's because we have expensive equipment in it. So that's it's just a way. What I want to say is, want to ensure that the landscaping is going to be done very quickly at the stages of construction, just because the fence has to be in place.
Okay, thanks, Pedro. Jane.
No, I'm good. Thank you.
You're good. And then Mr. Kohler.
Yeah, John Kohler, 72 Franklin Road again. I just wanted to echo Pedro, if we could, through the chair, the final result from the Liberty Mutual landscape was less than ideal. So if as part of this review, as we're looking towards this potentially glowing area, if the rest of Franklin Road views could also be at least reviewed, that would be greatly appreciated.
Yeah, no.
On the agenda. All I ask. Thank you.
Yeah, no
I have a
problem.
question.
Sorry, who was that had the question?
Deb.
Yes. Yeah, go ahead, Deb.
Hey, I'm not sure I saw access to watering those plantings. Can you speak to that? How would these plantings be watered?
There's two ways that we've done in the past. If it's accessible to the contractor, they do a smaller water truck. If not, they have a pickup truck with some water tanks in the back. That's how they gotta do it.
So, how frequently is that written somewhere on the plans that a water truck will be maintaining them? It depends on the time of year that this goes in. It could be a problem.
Yeah, so basically, it's not written in the plans right now because the way that we do it is that it depends on the type of tree that we order from the arborist. When you order a tree, it tells you how you have to maintain it, and the contractor has to obey to that. That's the way that we write the contracts. Basically, because if it doesn't, the trees are going to die, and he's going to have to replace it at his own cost. So the watering is going to be according to the specific type of trees, and it's going to be recommended by the arborist.
Okay, thank you.
And Mary.
Yeah, my comment is back to Miriam's suggestion about making sure that there's conditions about unforeseen screening issues that come up. Because obviously, doing this all by a plan, by, the sight lines, very helpful. And the grades, looking at the grades, all of that is very good, but there may be some unforeseen situations. And I think her suggestion regarding the conditions and the applicant's acquiescence to that is very important.
Yeah. Thanks, Mary. And just to confirm, it sounds like we've got reasonable alignment of a condition around an escrow for maintenance of the screening somewhere in the range of 20 to 25% of the total screening cost.
Yes, we're okay with that.
Okay. All right. Thank you. And I will say, I really appreciate the applicant's flexibility and willing to work with us on screening. To Muriel's point, that was something that didn't go as well as we had hoped on previous solar projects. Something that I think is very, very important to us as a board as we try to to minimize the impact to the neighboring properties. So appreciate your flexibility there.
Question. This is Dave.
Yes, Dave.
So I just wanted to, we talked about a lot of stuff. I just want to summarize the number of conditions we're looking at. So we're looking at one for like the performance guarantee kind of stuff, the escrow account, and we're looking at a second one for the timing of the installation. Was there others or just those two?
The only other follow-up was that the applicant was going to look into an alternative fencing option to galvanized chain link.
That might turn into a third condition, correct?
Sorry, what's that, Dave?
That may turn into a third condition.
It could, yes.
Thanks.
So I think there was one more follow-up. I think the photographs of other sites, the day and night photographs of the screening, as well as the light reflection at night, I think those were some of the other action items for the next meeting.
Yep, got it. Thank you. Okay, so I think that was a big one, and appreciate everyone's patience as we work through that. Definitely a few follow-ups, but I think some good progress. So moving forward in the outline, the next topic is impact on open space. And I know that we've covered off on this earlier in the hearing, but maybe if the applicant can just very quickly summarize the open space portion of the application.
Sure. So in the site plan package, we have a whole sheet dedicated to documenting the open space and trails within the existing property. So lot 1 is the solar array parcel and within town of Hopkinton, follows this path around through here. So in lot 1 area, which we are committing to provide a land donation and commit to open space, is approximately 45 acres, and that's detailed in the table over here. What I do on the table is I break down the different open space areas within the professional office district and the agricultural district, as those zoning districts have different requirements. But overall, the open space associated with this application is 45.5 acres. We also calculated the open space, which is required to be at 40% per what Attorney Costa described earlier of the ongoing condition for what we're calling Lot 1, the existing facility. So this plan also documents that we satisfy that requirement. And then there's also a small piece in Ashland, about 1.8 acres, which will also be donated as open space. So, total lot area for this project is, call it 46 and 3/4 acres for open space. And trails that are going to be maintained are in this dark section right through here. So this trail up to here, which connects to the existing trail running through this area. All these trails will be maintained. This is the section of 300-foot trail that's going to be replaced. So we'll be eliminating this little loop section here and straightening that trail out along the edge of the array, fencing and landscaping. The trail down the center of the gas line easement is going to remain. So the only section of trail that's being removed is this section right through here. And we have this section of trail right through here. These are all essentially dead-end spurs of trails, which and this originated near the edge of the existing parking area, and provided access to the trail network. We're going to eliminate that, and this section of the trail will also be eliminated. But the remaining trails on site will be preserved.
Thanks, Nick. And so just to clarify, so it's about 47 acres of open space. And how big is the array component? I want to say it was 26 or 28 acres.
The array disturbance is roughly 25 and a half acres.
Okay. Thank you. Any questions or comments from the board specific to open space? Any questions or comments from the public on the topic of open space? Yes, Mr. Gasser.
This is a question for the board, I guess, is Seaboard promised to put in the condition of the special permit to donate the open space to HALT. And I assume that's including 53.9 acres total, which includes all the 3 parcels. What I'm wondering is there anything in the bylaw that prevents all of that open space from being donated separate parcels, or does some of that have to stay within the existing parcel?
That's a good question. I don't know that I can answer that, but I think it makes sense to make a note of that and ask Mr. Gelsich when he returns from vacation.
Okay, so I would like to clarify ultimately how much is going to be actually donated versus perhaps a conservation restriction or something like that.
And I will say, I don't know if Attorney Costa or Pedro or Nick, if you have any thoughts on that. Pedro, are you raising your hand?
Yeah, I just wanted to, so the numbers that Nick specified right now is what the array looks like at this moment. Our idea, which we have committed since the beginning, to preserve the trail is, and also to donate everything in the solar array parcel that is in Hopkinton and also in Ashland to the open space. That's what we're going to do.
Okay.
So yeah.
Okay. So to answer Mr. Gasser's question, all of it would be donated.
Yeah.
It's great. Thank you.
Question to the chair, this is Dave.
Yes, go ahead, Dave.
So I guess I've been kind of thinking about asking this question for a long time. I don't think there's a lot of merit to it, but I just wanted to hear what Mr. Gasser says. What if we have an option of donating the land to the town or to HALT? What are the guarantees with the HALT that this property will never be used for other purposes?
Guarantees? Well, I mean, HALT is a conservation organization, land preservation. We would never do anything with the land other than conserve it. That's in our charter. We would lose our nonprofit status if we, for example, sold it off and did something else with it. There are ways to protect it. A conservation restriction can be placed on it, but HALT couldn't be the possessors of the conservation restriction if it was our land. Somebody else would have to take that on, which is difficult and complicated. That the conservation restriction would go forever, but basically, as a conservation organization, you have to assume that HALT is going to preserve the land, I guess.
That's fair. I just wanted to ask the question and hear it be said. I would not doubt that going forward. I mean, that's the whole principle of the organization. So thank you.
All right.
Yes.
And Jane, you had a question or a comment?
This question is more or less for Mari. Mari, what are the chances of HALT going in there and doing some little trails to finish the connectivity around the perimeter using the existing trails that the solar is going to, promote or keep? And would that be something that HALT would be interested in doing going on further on down the line?
Yes. When I mentioned a parking area on Franklin Road, that would be in the lower left corner of the plan there. We would need to build a trail from that parking area to connect up to the existing trail network. So that'd be one example of a new trail. We're also looking at kind of finishing the circuit trail around the pond. That's not in these pictures. that trail is extremely difficult to walk now without getting very wet. We would hope to have a loop trail around that pond.
That's fantastic. I know that would be a real plus for the town. And also there's a trail to the northwest side that connects to Legacy Farms. I think that would be an awesome project as well.
Yeah, we've been looking at that. We need to get in touch with Legacy Farms to find out what their plans are, if anything, and get permission to connect through
Sure.
to the trails.
Thank you.
Mr. Kohler.
Yeah, John Kohler, 72 Franklin Road. I guess to follow on to Dave's question in terms of HALT versus other town entities, I guess my question is HALT willing to commit to not restricting the activities beyond what is currently being used? For example, I believe that HALT currently does not, while they allow rather high-end horse activities, they do not allow bicycles, which are currently being used on those trails. So is HALT going to say that that is now going to be a restricted activity, or will they commit to allowing the existing use? Because I know that some of the neighbors do use those trails for biking.
We last year we modified our biking policy, so we now allow bikes on all trails.
Perfect, thank you.
We still don't allow hunting. Hunting generally not, unless it comes with the initial agreement, but biking, no motorized vehicles. If there's a pond there, people can take kayaks out or whatever. It probably wouldn't be motorboats. So.
And then
there used to be a trail around the perimeter, so it's just a matter of reestablishing that. I've talked to Pedro about that in the past. But.
Yes. I think we need a bridge or boardwalk or something in one place.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, Maury. And Mary?
Yes, my question related to the transfer of ownership of open space and the maintenance of the landscaping. So is all the landscaping for screening purposes on land that would be retained in ownership by Seabourn? Or is any of it on the open space land that would be transferred to HALT? And if any of it is on the HALT, the future HALT land, just for lack of a better term, does that complicate the lifetime maintenance and decisions that would be made by the landscaping contractor and access to that land and so on and so forth?
Yes, Mr. Costa.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. So let me address that, and let me talk generally, if I could, about the donation of open space, because I've dealt with this in connection with a number of projects, and frankly, most often on your side of the table representing boards that are seeking to condition their decisions on contributions of open space and restrictions on that open space so that they have some sense of surety that that land won't be developed in the future. So with regard to this question of access, there are portions, I believe, and certainly Nick can correct me if I'm wrong, but there are portions of landscaping that are located along the edges, arguably may extend into areas that are considered to be open space, particularly as those trees expand and grow, because many of them are located along the edge of trails and are in locations that are shown on the plan as open space. That can be addressed easily enough, even if the land weren't to be owned by Seaboard Solar. That can be addressed by way of an easement for purposes of future maintenance, even by way of something as simple as a license agreement that a Seaboard Solar or its site caretaker the ability, the access onto the HALT land for purposes of maintaining the landscape. I will say that boards sometimes grapple with this issue of, well, how do we go about conditioning a decision to ensure that this open space remains open in perpetuity? And I will tell you from the applicant's perspective, and I've heard other attorneys say this, and I can say it really and truly in the context of this project, we don't care. This is open space. We don't need it for our project. It's not proposed as part of the project. So we're happy to part with it in whatever way makes the most sense, so long as in parting with it, number one, we have the ability to perform our other obligations that you might include as conditions of your decision, like maintaining the landscaping, for example. Number two, it doesn't put us in a position where we're no longer in zoning compliance because you've now caused us to reconfigure our lot in such a way that we don't meet zoning requirements. And number three, and this is really, I guess, sort of a caution to the board, I always recommend that boards condition their decision on whether it be a fee conveyance or an easement conveyance or a conservation restriction, but that they keep it flexible in terms of how the land gets conveyed and to whom it gets conveyed. Because we've had instances, and in fact, I think that Pedro can probably speak to this because I know that he and his company had this situation in another community where a condition of a decision was drafted requiring the conveyance to a particular third-party entity. In fact, I think in Pedro's instance, it was the town itself, and then the town was unable to get the necessary town meeting vote to accept the land. So we obviously can't control what a third party does, whether that third party is the town itself or some entity like HALT or some additional party that might be the holder of conservation land. So again, we don't really have a horse in the race. We couldn't care less how you condition the decision to ensure that this land is protected in perpetuity as open space, so long as it doesn't affect our ability to develop the project. So I presume that if we get to a point where the board sees fit and decides to approve this project, approve the special permit, that we'll have an opportunity to take a look at the draft decision and to see the condition, and we can have a further discussion then about how it's crafted. But I do think that there are a lot of moving parts here that sort of need to be addressed to ensure that the land is protected, but also that we have the necessary rights and aren't placed in a position where either we can't fulfill the obligations that you're placing upon us or our lot is no longer zoning.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Costa. And I'm making a note of that because as I'm looking at at least our preliminary conditions, I don't see one in there related to that. So I think it makes sense to work with our professional staff to make sure that that condition is appropriately worded, that, to your point, ensures that the land is conserved with its intent, and that it allows the town to move forward accordingly. So appreciate your perspective there. Okay. I think we're good on open space. We do have a follow-up there just with regards to the wording of the condition itself. Next item on the outline, and just a quick time check. We've got about 30 minutes left, so I'm hoping that some of these are relatively straightforward, but the next item is earth removal with regards to the Water Resource Protection Overlay District. Nick, anything specific with regards to earth
Sure.
removal?
We are not proposing the removal of any earth within the watershed protection district. Let me get to a plan that shows the line. This line right through here, it's a good zoom in view of it. Here's some minor site grading for the swale along the edge here. The only thing that's going to be removed is pavement. This whole area through here is all pavement within the watershed protection district. So we're actually going to be removing a significant portion of that paved area within the watershed protection district. That pavement will be, recycled and taken off site. But as far as other removal of earth from the site, there's no proposed earth removal or any other materials on the site.
Okay. That's great, and we do appreciate you removing that pavement as well, so thank you. Any questions or comments with regards to earth removal? Yes, I have a phone number. Sorry, Ann, did you have a comment on earth removal?
I did, but I actually wanted to comment on the open space. Am I to understand that where the array would be, that would be part of the donation to HALT?
No.
After 20 years? After 20 years?
I don't believe so, but
Well, I mean, there's no use in keeping this butterfly shape of meadow once the arrays have to be removed.
I don't think that's part of the application. I'm looking at Mr. Costa. I know you can't see me looking at you, but I'm looking at you. But I'm
So, Mr. Chairman, I can address that. So that's not the, like, I can appreciate the source of the question. I will tell you that, you know, these projects, the lifespan on these projects can be anywhere from 20 to 30 years. There are provisions addressing potential future removal. That doesn't necessarily mean the removal will be to simply then allow the land to lie vacant or dormant. It could be to replace the panels with what is then the latest technology through whatever process might exist. So, you know, the removal mechanism is meant to acknowledge that at some point in time, the technology will become outdated and these panels may not be functional for whatever reason, and that they ought to be then removed from the site. But the proposal now before
So
the
the
board.
disruption could go on for perpetuity. We could have a butterfly vacancy in the forest.
You will have a butterfly-shaped solar project in the forest potentially for as long as the site is developed and used for solar energy.
But that could be 100 years, right?
That's correct.
I don't think that sounds very, it doesn't give me a lot of confidence. I will say that rather than adding to open space enjoyment and wildlife habitat, what's happening here is actually the disruption and dissatisfaction with the site to both the neighbors and to people who want to go there for recreation. And I just want to mention that I am at this moment appealing to the DEP to prevent this project. And so I just don't want us all to feel that it's destined to go through. Thank you.
Thank you, Ann. And John, Mr. Kohler.
I'm sorry, John Kohler for 72 Franklin Road again. One kind of related question on that. With the gas station, there is a bond that's put in to make sure that any hazardous waste is cleaned up at the end of the useful life. I don't remember whether that was also part of the solar panel aspect. And is there any conditions under which a performance guarantee to remove such materials at the end of this useful life, whether it's 20 or 30 years, or is it just that it would sit there and rot like?
Yes. So there is a proposed condition, and they're required to, forget the exact details of the way it's worded, but they're required to get an estimate on what the removal would cost prior to commencing construction for the removal of the panels. And there's a bond, there's an associated bond to cover that cost.
I thought that was just on the screening. I'm sorry.
Nope, no worries. I apologize, I don't remember the name, but Bianta.
Hey, Bob Ionta.
Hey, Bob.
Hi, 50 Franklin Road. On a similar note, I know we've heard talk about performance bond and about the escrow account for the screening and so forth for the landscaping. And what concerns me about that is it's the 3 to 5 year timeframes that have been discussed sound like an awfully short time to me. I've lived in Hopkinton for a long time, and I've lived only at this address only for since 2007, I think. And it's amazing how that time has flown by. And I think 3 to 5 years goes by in a snap, and we might discover, 6 years from now or 10 years from now that the landscaping is failing or was inadequate or something like that. So I'm wondering if anything could be done to extend the timeframes to those accounts.
Yeah, and I think I will just make one comment on that. From a landscaping perspective, the most likely time for a tree or plant to die is within the first year just due to transplant shock. So I do think that 5 years covers the bulk of it, but you know, the maintenance or the removal bond is longer term. And then Pedro, I think you mentioned that you would be open to lengthening the bond beyond 5 years, but I don't want to put words in your mouth. So is that
Yeah,
true?
yeah. With your permission, that's exactly what I wanted to add. So first, we have the warranty from the supplier, which lasts a year. We are going to have the performance bond for the landscaping that's going to last a lifetime of the solar array. And we also going to have the escrow account for the maintenance and adding extra trees if needed, which is going to be 25% of the cost of the landscaping installation. So those are the three items that hopefully that will cover that. And I also wanted to touch the comment about the decommissioning. I think you mentioned it, but we're going to be submitting a decommissioning plan prior to the issuance of the building permit. So in the event that this technology is no longer in use in 25, 30 years, we are putting this, I mean, we plan to do it in case that we're no longer in the picture, the town will have the funds to remove the panels and bring this area back to what it was or it is right now.
But that's great. But I also wonder about what happens, all this for the life of the solar array, does that extend to a new owner? What happens if you decide to sell this to another operator 2 or 3 years from now? Or 10?
So, yeah, so the condition with the solar project, if we were, which we're not planning on it, and selling the solar project, whoever buys it owns it, that goes with it. And same with the land, like in all of our projects, we own the real estate, and the projects also go with the land.
Okay, and for the chair, does that, do any of the protections the town is putting in place, like the conditions that are being discussed here, do any of those extend to new owners under those circumstances?
Yes, they do.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks for the questions. Okay, so I'm going to move on here. Zoning compliance with regards to Water Resource Protection Overlay District with regards to 61A. And Muriel, did you have any, I feel like you made a comment about this previously, but I just want to make sure there's nothing we need to address or discuss here.
Yeah, I think that my concerns were addressed with the review of Beta. And I didn't have specific concerns, just knew that we were going in near the Water Resource Protection Overlay District or within it. And I just wanted to make sure we considered that.
Okay, thanks, Muriel. Are there any questions or comments from the board or from the public with regards to zoning compliance with the Water Resource Overlay District?
I don't have anything, Gary, but there's a comment on the Zoom comment that Kimberly King would like to speak.
Yes.
Yes, Chairman, can you hear me,
Yes.
Kimberly King?
Yes.
Yeah.
I do. I apologize. I didn't see a hand raised, so I didn't.
That's
You didn't
okay.
pop to the top of the
We were
list.
late to the game here by accident.
Yes.
My
Can you just state your address as well?
Yes. My address is 13 Fawn Ridge Road, so I'm in a butter. I have sent a couple of letters today to the planning board, but there has been a transition here I see from Muriel to you. If I have your permission, I would like you to read, I would like to read to you and the board a short letter as far as my research goes.
Okay.
Okay.
Is it with regards to anything in particular, or is it just a general statement?
No, this would be in regards to Seaboard Solar and a lot of research I have done.
Okay.
Okay, so my name is Kimberly King. I'm an abutter to the proposed Seaboard Solar project on Franklin Road. My house is located at 13 Fawn Ridge. I have been engaged in a significant amount of research in the past months on other projects Seaboard Solar has engaged in other Massachusetts towns. I've contacted 6 towns. They are as follows: Blackstone, Sheffield, Charlotte, Auburn, Oxford, Westminster. I received return correspondence from 3. I spoke with Mary from the planning board from Oxford. She saw my message and said to herself, I need to call her back. They did 2 projects in town and we call them Nightmare 1 and Nightmare 2. She told me they had other solar companies in town that were wonderful. Solar Board was not one of them. She told me this is a special permit your town is giving. Make it really special. This company needs a lot of conditions. Steve Wallace from the Town Planning Board of Westminster also did not have any good experience with Seaboard Solar. He told me the company did not stick with any schedule they agreed to. He warned our town to sit down with all departments involved to come up with a very strict schedule for the company to adhere to. He wished his town had done this. That was his warning. And finally, I spoke to the Town of Sheffield Planning Board. One member said it was the worst permit they issued in 9 years he was on the planning board. It has been a disaster. I also spoke to a butter to the project there, and it has been 2 years, and there is still no promised screening on the project. The board laments their lack of specificity. There have been many heated meetings between the town, abutters, and Seaboard, specifically Pedro, and according to them, Pedro has failed repeatedly to live up to his promises. I did speak with an abutter last week, and he said that he has heard Seaboard wanted to give a bond in lieu of the actual landscape screening to get their certificate of operation. It was slightly unclear how this happened, but Seaboard went around the planning board to the electrical inspector and got hooked up to the provider to provide power to the grid. The electrical inspector did not realize Seaboard did not get the final approval. They are trying to work around the planning board. Planning board is not happy there. There is also an email from an abutter. And it has been 2 years since they have been waiting for screening. And I have forwarded that to Muriel. I thought she was still the chair. So you may see that. I do not need to read that right now, but this is not a good company. We should do everything we can to make sure that if this goes through, which I believe that we should simply not deal with this company, we need to have very, very strict contingencies in place.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. King. Appreciate your input and your research. I like every project, we are very mindful of conditions, and for a number of reasons, one being that this parcel could be sold, and it's important that those conditions continue to pertain to future owners as well. So I'd rather not get into I think that if we're having a constructive conversation, then I think that that's great. But and I agree with you that we need to make sure that we have conditions to make sure that these applicants do what they agree to do, and that's always been the objective of the board. So, but I do appreciate your research and your willingness to share that with us. Okay, so back to the outline. Zoning compliance with regards to Water Resource Protection Overlay District. I think we're okay there. The next item is limit of disturbance and tree clearing limit. And Nick, do you feel like we've probably talked about this a lot already, but maybe the 30-second overview, and then we'll go ahead and entertain comments or questions from the board first, followed by the public.
Sure. So, as discussed, limit of disturbance from the original plan that was submitted back about 7-8 months ago, had the limit of disturbance extending up through this area up to the setback line, and essentially covered all majority of the existing trails. Since that time, we've had a good discussion about trail access, and Seaboard has committed to reducing the size of the array approximately by 1/5. We're at about a 5 megawatt system previously, and we're now at about a 4 megawatt system. And we reduced the limit of clearing by approximately 4 acres from the original plan submitted. limits of clearing haven't changed a whole lot in the last few months, in the last 2 plan iterations. Everything has been essentially contained, excuse me, within this area, with emphasis placed on keeping all new site disturbance 50 feet away from the edge of the existing wetland, and further than that where possible, and maintaining the existing trail access. So those were essentially our parameters when we redesigned the site, to reduce the array capacity, to stay within those areas, and provide maximum screening to the abutters. We're 100 feet from the property line in this area with any clearing, 75 feet just in the area of this proposed basin, but then we're over 100 feet up through this area through here. And setbacks from the northerly property line are in excess of 150 feet to the northerly property line in this area up through here. That essentially defines the limit of clearing. If there's any questions, I'll be more than happy to answer them.
Thanks, Nick. And I will say candidly, this is probably one of my least favorite parts of these solar developments is the tree clearing. But I do applaud the applicant for your willingness to work with us on reducing the size of the array, on maintaining trails, on increasing screening, and overall trying to minimize the impact that occurs from land disturbance and tree clearing. Any questions or comments from the board? We'll start with the board first. Mary, did you? I see a hand. Sort of.
Sorry, that was kind of just my technological problems here, but I'll still speak a little bit. I agree with you that tree clearing is my least favorite part of any development. But it does seem like it happens for solar projects extensively, and it's very unfortunate. And I definitely think it has an impact on our natural resources in our town. But at the same time, we have to factor in that this is private land, and at least up until the point where some of it's given to halt, it is private land. And so that is something I struggle with, but I think that has to be a balance. So I appreciate what the developer has done thus far to try to minimize the impacts, but it certainly continues to be a consideration. All right.
Thanks, Mary. Any comments or questions? And like I said, I know we've talked about the potential impact of this a lot, but is there anything new or any new considerations or questions that people have with regards to tree clearing and land disturbance? Okay. So we'll go ahead and close that out.
Hello. I just needed to make a comment here.
Yes, go ahead, Ann. Yes, go ahead, Ann.
Before this particular meeting ends, Muriel and I had a discussion about a letter I'd written into you all, and she seemed to agree that you could bring town council Ray Mieres, who is an environmental attorney, in to see whether the present bylaws of the town could prevent this development. So I wanted to clarify that.
Sure, and I'm going to defer to Muriel on that. Muriel, do you want to go ahead and comment there?
And hi, it's Muriel. I want to make sure that we are very clear. I did have a conversation with you. I did not, and in fact, I explicitly told you that we cannot bring town council in to disallow any proposal. We can certainly bring town council in to ask questions and clarify issues and make sure that the planning board is operating within the bounds of the bylaws and the law, but not to oppose a particular a particular applicant's proposal or to support a particular applicant's proposal.
Okay,
I apologize if there was misunderstanding on that. We are working very diligently to work within the bylaws with this applicant to make sure that we are following the law and also trying to balance the needs of the neighbors and the towns in general, the town's desires. It is a really big issue and a really complicated issue to see so much beautiful forested land be cut down for solar energy, and we're all also proponents of solar. But I explicitly told you that I was not able to do that.
Well, what I understood, please let me interject here. What I understood is that I considered that the present solar bylaws might prevent this kind of construction. And I thought I discussed with you the fact that you could have the town council see whether the present bylaws are strong enough to whether they don't allow this kind of deforestation.
So Anna, I think we're going to move on. And at the end of the day, that's what we're doing right now is we're going through and evaluating this project against our current bylaws. But that's for us to evaluate as a board. And
Right,
to
but
Muriel's
could
point,
you
we
use
could just hang on.
the help of the town council in evaluating it?
If we felt we needed to, we could ask them for clarification. But their job is not to interpret the bylaws and how this conforms to it. That's our job. And
Okay,
we're
thank you
certainly
very
not going
much.
to go ask them to guide us and give us some direction in how to either approve or deny an applicant. That's just not something that we would ever do.
It's just that I know that he is a prominent environmental attorney, and
Yes.
and maybe it might be a good idea to take some of his consulting advice.
Okay. Thank you.
If I could,
Thank you, Ann.
if I could just say, Gary,
yes,
one
Meryl.
last thing. This board, not the complete board because we have some new board members, but we have had advice and counsel from our town council on the issues revolving these kind of applicants in particular. So I want to make sure, Ann, you're clear and everybody else listening that we have gotten advice from town council in the past, and we do our very best to comply with all of the information that we receive.
Thank you,
Well,
Mary.
thank you.
Mr. Ober. Sorry, let me unmute you here. Okay, Mr. Ober, the mic is yours.
Okay, thank you. Quick question on those ceremonial landscaping sites. I don't know if we ever discussed what the final resolution to that whole issue was.
Yes, that's correct. Pedro, do you have an update on the?
Yes, I actually do. I met the Narragansett tribe. They went to the site 2 weeks ago. They staked all the monuments located in our property, not just in what might be the project area, but also outside of it. Then our surveyors met them, and I met them on site last week. We located all the monuments, and we're working on the plan right now.
Okay, so there sounds like there's still a little bit more to do there with regards to those.
Yeah, I mean, COVID definitely delayed this process, but they went to the site 2 weeks ago with work doing the survey right now, and we located all the flags. So that was good.
Okay, so do you think you'll have an update on that at the next meeting?
Yeah, we hope to have it finalized by the next meeting.
Okay.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, go ahead.
I think that we crossed off historic resources maybe too soon because we don't have that finalized plan.
Yeah, I would agree, and I just circled it to uncross it.
Thank you.
And actually, that's a. Sorry. I think. Are there any other comments on topic 6.20? Okay. And I know we're at 10 o'clock right now. I guess my question for my fellow board members, do we want to try and get through a few more of these items, or do we want to hold those for the next meeting?
Through the chair, this is Dave.
Yes, Dave.
Thank you. We've been starting at 7 o'clock recently, so I would suggest that we do a hard stop at 10 o'clock. I mean, when we used to start at 7:30, it was, reasonable to go beyond 10 o'clock, but I just think more than 3 hours is a bit rough on people.
I concur.
I'm
So do I.
1,000%
So
there
do
with
I.
you.
Okay.
Yeah, I think all of us, I've been sitting at the same desk for 14 hours now, so it's.
Yeah. Can I just? I know everyone just said let's. Well, okay. So I was contemplating going back to site lighting because I realized we had not closed that off, and I think that's a quick one. But if it's a quick one now, it'll be a quick one later as well.
That's true.
So I guess my question to the applicant, I'm assuming that you are willing to continue. I appreciate your patience in this, and I really do applaud your willingness to work with us, whether that be through agreements you've made and conditions and escrow accounts and whatnot. So I do recognize that, and I'm grateful for your flexibility here. But are you willing to continue to the next meeting?
We are.
Okay. And so that next meeting is July. Is it
27th?
I think it's July 27th. Is today today's the 13th. Okay. I apologize. I was thinking today was the 12th. So I will entertain a motion to continue this hearing to July 27th and to extend the decision to, what would that be? That would be August. That'd be
August 3rd.
August 3rd. Yes.
So moved.
Second, Mary Larson Marlowe.
Any discussion? Okay, so we'll go through a roll call vote. So Gary Trendle, yes. Jane Moran?
Jane Moran, yes.
Dave?
Dave Paul, yes.
Nick just stopped sharing and my order went out of whack here.
Sorry.
Muriel?
Muriel Kramer, yes. Can I offer a friendly amendment? I don't think, somebody correct me, Stephanie, hopefully. This decision comes in 90 days after the decision of the board, I think. So we wouldn't put on a date of 7 days out for the decision.
Correct.
Okay.
So
thanks, Muriel, for catching that. So what's the best way to word this? We'll modify or amend that to
if Rob accepts it as a friendly amendment, I think it works.
I accept the friendly amendment.
Okay. So then I guess with the roll call vote, we should re-vote on that.
Yeah, and I really don't think that we could vote a different decision timeline anyway, but just for clarity.
Yeah. Okay. So again, we'll roll call vote. Gary Trendle, yes. Jane Moran?
Jane Moran, yes.
Dave Paul?
Dave Paul, yes.
Muriel Kramer?
Muriel Kramer, yes.
Deb Feinberg?
Deb Feinberg, yes.
Mary Marlowe Larson?
Mary Larson Marlowe, yes.
Sorry, Mary. It's getting late for me too. I've also been in my chair for
me calling
something like
Muriel
16
Mary,
hours. And Rob?
Rob Benson, yes.
Okay. Did I miss anybody?
You missed me.
Sundar.
Oh, Sundar, I apologize.
That's fine. Sundar, yes.
Okay. All right. So again, thank you to Seaboard. I know this is a long process, but I really do appreciate your patience and flexibility. And we will speak with you again in 2 weeks. And so now everyone's favorite part of the meeting, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All right. Roll call vote. Gary Trendle, yes. Jane?
Jane Moran, yes.
Dave?
Dave Paul, yes.
Muriel,
Muriel Kramer, yes.
Sundar,
Sundar, yes.
Deb,
Deborah Feinberg, yes.
Mary,
Mary Larson Marlowe, yes.
and Rob.
Rob Benson, yes.
All right. Well, thanks everyone, and have a good night. And many of us will talk again in 2 weeks. So take care.
Good night.
Thank you, Gary.
Thank you.
Good job.